Study session for Monday, July 18, 2022. It's called to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Kaufman.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Bergen.
Here.
Councilmember Coombs.
Present.
Councilmember Gardner.
Here.
Councilmember Jurinski. Councilmember Jurinski. You're muted. Councilmember Lawson. Councilmember Marcano.
Present.
Councilmember Medina.
Here.
Councilmember Murillo.
She's having computer issues.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Sundberg.
Here.
Councilmember Zabonik.
Here.
There's a quorum.
Announcement for the call-in line.
Good evening. Thank you for joining tonight's Aurora City Council study session. If you are listening on the phone, please note public comments are not taken during study sessions. The phone line is in listen-only mode. The City Council welcomes comments at regular council meetings on both matters appearing on the agenda and during public invited to be heard. The phone line opens for sign-up on those evenings at 6 p.m.
No mayor's update, issue updates. Seeing none, I guess the first proposal is mine, so let me turn the virtual gavel over to the Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. First item up is the resolution for Fare-Free August on RTD. Mayor?
Very well. So this came out of the Metro Mayors Conference, and the state legislature passed basically an appropriation to cover the month of August in terms of fares for, mass transit for buses and light rail. And so what the Metro Mayors Caucus has been working with RTD, and RTD requested that we pass an ordinance in support of, well, actually what it does is it does bind the city to helping them to promote the free fares for them. What they're trying to do is get the ridership back up to where pre-pandemic levels. And let me tell you why that's important to Aurora. It's certainly important to a lot of our residents that rely on mass transit, both bus and light rail. But we are trying to promote transit-oriented development in the city of Aurora, and that really relies on largely on the R line. And so they've already had to cut back the stops from, they've gone from 15 minutes to 30 minutes. And we've in fact had to argue to keep it at 30 minutes and not make it worse. And so we clearly want to move that transit-oriented development forward, and it's reliant on light rail being successful. So this is a pretty simple ask, but it really would have our comms department and our different social media platforms promote ridership during the month of August while it's free. And the hope is from RTD and from the Metro Mayors Caucus is that after August, that once people start using it, that they'll continue to use it even though the fares will return in September. And with that, Mayor Pro Tem, I'd ask for I asked to move forward.
Okay, and Mayor, you don't have any other presentation, correct? That you just your.
No, there's one on water that I'll be introducing.
Okay. Do we have any questions from council members on the resolution?
Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, Councilmember Coombs.
Yes, no question, just kind of adding on to this, there are a number of transit advocacy groups that are also encouraging folks to promote this as elected officials. So if folks are interested, they have kind of social media kits and ideas to help you kind of demonstrate yourself using public transit, or if you live in an area that doesn't provide you that opportunity, also demonstrating kind of the difficulty of getting to transit from your area, just so they can show what is the efficacy of a fare free transit system, but also where are the gaps. And I think in our city, there's definitely plenty of room to highlight for folks, the areas in our city that are not well served. So if you are interested in any information about that, I can help you get connected to folks.
Thank you. Other comments or questions from council members?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, Councilmember Coombs, I would love to have that kit. So I would love to promote that as well. And I just want to say that generally I'm really excited about this initiative by RTD. So thank you, Mayor, for running a resolution on it. This is something that I've seen done in other cities in the States and elsewhere, and it's exceptionally successful wherever it's been done. So I'm hoping we get to, experience some of that success and encourage folks to, travel by train. Thank you.
Other comments or questions? And I just have one myself, Mayor. So it's no cost to the city. It's being promoted by the Metro mayors.
Well, it's, I suppose you could argue that it's funded by the state legislature by an appropriation to cover the cost of all the fares, the estimated value of the fares for the month of August. I guess you could argue that there's some cost to us, but it'd be pretty marginal, and that would be, staff time in developing the content, although a lot of it's probably RTD has a package probably they can take from, but simply, posting the content on our social media platforms and putting it out by whatever mechanisms they do, any costs associated with that, which is largely staff time, we would incur.
Okay, very good. Are there any objections to moving this forward? Seeing none, it looks like it moves forward, Mayor, and I'll yield back to you.
Thank you. The virtual gavel back. And is there any objection to moving the consent calendar item number 2A through 2G forward? Seeing no objection, item number 2A through 2G will be moved forward. Item number 3A, appointment of Aurora's poet laureate, Midori Clark.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Thank you so much for providing a little bit of an audience today and hopefully deciding to appoint our next poet laureate. Mayor Steve Hogan and the Aurora City Council created this poet laureate position in 2013 to celebrate and highlight the creativity of the thriving arts community in Aurora. The poet laureate advocates and promotes poetry and also the love of literature within the city. And if you're unfamiliar, Jovan Mays and Asetu Django were the first and second poet laureates for the city. The objectives of the poet laureate are to promote poetry within the city, raise awareness of the power of poetry in the spoken word, help students embrace the world of poetry, assist the citizens of Aurora in sharing their own poetry and stories, celebrate the diversity of Aurora in community outreach programs, commemorate city and national events in poetic format. We did start a new application process in January of 2022 to select the city's third poet laureate. Mays and Django, as well as Colorado's poet laureate, Bobby Lefebvre, served as judges. And I'm grateful to Council Member Danielle Jurbinsky, who represented you all, as well as our fabulous Library Board President, Paula Vargas. I served as the staff judge on the committee. We had 6 great applicants who came through the program. And in order to apply, they had to write their application, do an in-person interview with that panel that I just mentioned, and also perform an original work. The panel unanimously selected Asia Fox, and we want to recommend her for approval to be Aurora's next poet laureate with a 2-year term starting in May of 2022. And I think she was really selected just because she has been involved with poetry for a very long time. She's a local educator, but also I think her performance really set her apart. And
Well, great. Are there any questions? Dory? Seeing none, is there any opposition to moving? I'm sorry, what is your name again that you're recommending?
Asia Fox.
Asia, is there any opposition to moving Asia Fox forward? How could I forget a name like that? Okay, then okay. Thank you. That will move forward. Asia Fox will move forward as the next poet laureate. Thank you, Midori. Item number 3B, I guess I'm going to pass my virtual gavel back to the Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. This is 3B, enacting section 138, 191 of the city code pertaining to the use of turf and ornamental water features. Mayor, would you like to introduce your ordinance?
Sure. So I think probably particularly this year, working on an issue pertaining to a particular golf course that was a PGA golf course that proposed that has been approved, certainly by a prior mayor council. But when during the discussions of this, learned that it could use up to 1 million gallons of water a day in the summer, and knowing that how stressed the state of Colorado is in water and how difficult it is to procure water rights and how increasingly expensive that they're becoming. I felt at that time that it was important to move forward a proposal that would prohibit future golf courses that haven't been already approved. And so, in other words, the golf course in question is in the pipeline and it had already been approved. And so then I went to the water department and told them that I would be bringing forward this proposal, and I said, do you have other issues that you would like to put forward, and we can include it in one package? And so it was at that time that they had basically a package of issues that pretty much would summarize it in this way: that if you define it along functional versus non-functional turf, it's probably the easiest way to put it. Functional turf would be like an athletic field or a picnic area where there'd be an expectation that people would have that surface to sit down on. Let's say if it were the Great Lawn, as an example. And non-functional turf being grass for aesthetic purposes, whether it be on the medians. And then, so this is perspective. And so, so in, say, single-family detached homes, according to this proposed ordinance, you would be limited to 500 square feet. One would be limited to 500 square feet or 45%, whichever less, of turf in the backyard. There would be no turf allowed in the front yard or side yards, but there would be water-wise landscaping, so there'd be vegetation associated with that you'll be briefed on momentarily. I know that, and there is no aesthetic water features prospectively in new development allowed in the bill. And I know this seems like a fairly dramatic change, and it is. But the circumstances that we're in are dramatic. I mean, if you understand the challenges that Colorado has right now, with the Colorado River being over-appropriated even under the best of times, with being in a prolonged drought, with climate change, competition between urban and rural Colorado for water resources. I mean, this really is a prudent path forward. And the fact is that all the easy water rights are gone. They're gone. The ones that we will be looking forward prospectively are much, much harder to come by, much more expensive. And so if you're thinking about growth paying its own way, which is largely been the philosophy of the city council, then if you allow water use to continue in terms of outside irrigation, and I think a single family household, about 50% of the water use is outside irrigation. If you allow that to continue, then you're basically putting in effect a tax on all existing residents by virtue of raising their water rates to be able to meet the new demand. And so I think we have I believe that we need to grow. So I think we have a housing shortage, and that's leading to higher prices, both in rents and in for sale homes. And so I think home builders play a very important role in increasing the supply to bring to meet that demand, to bring down prices. But and I know that there are some home builders that I understand are opposed to parts of this ordinance that apply to them. But I want to remind the council that any of these home builders, and I support them, are publicly traded corporations, and that change is uncertainty, and uncertainty creates risk in their mind, and so they'd rather not do that change. And their immediate requirements are to the shareholders, and I get that. But it's our job as elected leaders to balance the interests of the city with their interests. And so that's why I think that this proposal is so important as is. And I know that there's been a discussion to, let's break it up. Let's have flexibility. But that's unenforceable. And I think the water department's going to speak to that. And so Aurora can lead the state in a problem that we're aware of, and that's only going to get worse, or we can follow. And I think all the residents will pay the price for that. And with that, let me turn it over to Marshall Brown.
For Tim York.
Thank you, Mayor. You're stuck with me tonight. Marshall Brown, General Manager of Aurora Water. Tim is actually a little bit under the weather, so he is not going to be able to join us. I'm going to share. I'm going to share a presentation. The mayor did a good job talking about some of what we're proposing. I'm going to share a couple of other things, broader perspective. This is something we've been working on now for over a decade. How do we become more efficient, more sustainable moving into the future? We've tried historically kind of a gradual incremental approach where we've put incentives in place. We've changed requirements, creating additional flexibility for how growth could occur. And frankly, we're not making the progress we need to make. And so this ordinance puts some additional requirements in place that will no longer be flexible or optional. They would be requirements. So a little bit of background. At first, I should ask, is everybody seeing the screen that says Colorado River Crisis? I can't really tell it, Sean.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So somewhat apropos, recently, June 14th this year, Bureau of Reclamation announced to the Colorado River Basin states that they have 60 days to create a plan to stop using between 2 and 4 million acre feet of water out of the Colorado River, or they will use their emergency authority to make those cuts. For perspective, the Colorado River compact divides 14 million acre feet between 7 basin states. So 2 to 4 million acre feet of 14 is significant. Also of note, the Colorado River hasn't had 14 million acre feet of water in it for decades. It's had closer to 11. The Bureau in this announcement said the challenges we're seeing today are unlike anything we've ever seen before. We're facing the growing reality that water supplies for agriculture, fisheries, ecosystems, industry, and cities are no longer stable due to climate change. We need to be taking action in all states, all sectors, all available ways. So again, kind of timely for our discussion tonight. Aurora's water supplies. We live in the arid West. We get 15 inches of precipitation, or right now a little bit less per year. Groundwater is not a viable long-term source, nor is it sustainable. So only about 5% of our supply comes from the groundwater. 15 inches of precipitation in Aurora will not meet our needs. They won't come close to meeting our needs. So we have to import water. 85% of the waters originate on the west slope. 86%, 85, 86% of those rights are controlled by agriculture. We then have about 85% of the demand is on the east slope. So water's on the west slope, we have to move it. Aurora gets about 25% of our water out of the Colorado River Basin, 50% out of the South Platte River Basin, and 25% out of the Arkansas River Basin. We cannot develop any additional water supply right now out of the Arkansas or Colorado River Basins. None. It's very highly doubtful that we'll ever be able to develop additional supplies out of the Colorado or Arkansas River Basin. So we're limited right now to developing additional water supplies out of the South Platte River Basin. With the crisis on the Colorado River, many additional water providers are looking to the South Platte River Basin to provide or meet those additional needs. Those supplies will not be able to meet everybody's additional needs unless we start removing significant portions of agriculture out of production. So we have a crisis. Aurora cannot continue to grow in the future as we have grown in the past. We cannot continue to provide the water supplies or volumes that we've provided in the past for the new growth. We have about 40% of our incorporated area that has not developed yet. That development will not be able to include high water uses as prior development has, or we will run out of water supplies. So that's kind of the situation we're looking at, which is why we're proposing an ordinance. As the mayor mentioned, our challenge right now is how do we create a difference and become more sustainable moving forward? How do we ensure that we've got the water supplies to meet that future growth? This conservation ordinance will provide local, regional, and state leadership towards responsible water stewardship. There are already multiple communities that have requested copies of this ordinance, and some of those are proposing the same ordinance later this year. Others are looking to propose the ordinance next year. It's not a crisis that's limited to Aurora. It's an arid west crisis, and almost any growing community in the Front Range is going to have to look at things like this to be able to continue to grow. A few communities are not growing. They may not have the same challenges, and there are one or two communities in the Front Range that have excess water supply. But those are the exceptions. The rule is everybody's going to have to do some things like this. And so when we looked at this ordinance, we looked at how do we reduce 25% of our overall water demand for growth moving forward. Half of our demand is outside. So half of our water use is outside. A lot of that is for aesthetic purposes, doesn't have any additional benefit or value other than to look at. And so that's what we targeted, was the aesthetic turf, high water use turf that's in Aurora or has been in Aurora. Right now, what's allowed under the current UDO is you can put 1,000 square feet in your front yard. Medians and curbside landscape can include turf if they're 10 feet or wider. Again, that changed over the last couple of years. It used to be you could put turf no matter the width of the medians and curbside landscapes, but a few years ago we said only if it's 10 feet or wider. Commercial currently can have up to 33% of their area landscaped with cool season turf. Multifamily, same thing, can have up to 33% of the landscaped area. And then pros, we have a lot of parks, a lot of city properties in the city. Those are controlled by the design manual in pros, and we're working with them to ensure that that design manual is consistent with this ordinance. Prior to moving forward with this, again, I've mentioned this has been in the works for years, if not decades. We've had a lot of feedback from the public, a lot of that feedback from property owners as we've moved forward with aggressive rebate programs to remove cool season turf and install Colorado-friendly landscaping has been, hey, why are you doing this only in rebates? Why aren't we doing something more proactive with growth? So we've been getting that feedback for years. We went out last year to the public and got more specific feedback. So we did a community engagement effort, put some questions out there about how the public felt if we were to propose limitations in these specific areas. So we asked them about golf courses. You see the blue on this chart are the portion of the 500 respondents who were supportive of limiting turf in golf courses. 86% were supportive of limiting or prohibiting turf in curbsides or median landscapes. Common areas, again, 90%. If it was aesthetic only, 90% of the public in this survey said, yeah, we should not have turf there. Front yards was actually supported a little bit more than the golf courses. So we had about a 74% approval rate for not having turf in front yards. This ordinance that we're talking about right now is forward looking. So we're looking at how do we grow in a more sustainable manner. It does not do things like, for example, Las Vegas is doing right now, where they mandated by 2026, all non-functional turf has to be removed. This is not doing that. This is looking at how we grow moving forward. We are planning to look at some of the existing non-functional landscaped areas within the existing community and perhaps creating more aggressive rebate programs, voluntary programs. But this ordinance, the requirements are focused on development and redevelopment. So key definitions in here. When I say turf, and we're talking limitations or prohibitions on turf, really what I'm talking about is cool season turf. So that's Kentucky bluegrass, that's fescue, that's the stuff that really sucks up a lot of water. It does not prohibit warm season turfs. So there, and I'll show some pictures later of some warm season turfs that this ordinance does not affect. Aesthetic turf means turf that again is just there to look at. It doesn't have a programmed or recreational purpose, and that's what we focus the ordinance on. Water-wise landscapes don't mean rocks and cactus. That's not what water-wise landscape means. Our requirements right now in code and with this ordinance would require 50% vegetative cover. And so I've got some pictures of that later. It's a lot of color, a lot of vegetation. It's actually some very nice landscaping. Medians is the area out in the middle of the street between opposing lanes of traffic. Curbside landscape are the landscape areas between curbs and sidewalks. And then again, active or programmed mean where you've got a primary function for sporting fields, things like that, or secondary functions like parties or planned events, things like that. So again, those are the types of spaces we're trying to preserve in this ordinance. What it will eliminate is proposed to eliminate turf, cool season turf in front yards, cool season turf in curbsides or medians, family and commercial landscape areas not designed to be active recreation or programmed areas, turf for new golf courses, cool season turf for new golf courses. It also prohibits spray irrigation in medians. So even when we landscape the medians, we're trying to get rid of some of that overspray and water waste that ends up in the streets that many of you, I'm sure, have seen. It preserves defined park spaces per the PRO's design manual. It preserves active and recreation spaces in commercial and multifamily developments. It preserves recreation spaces at schools, and it preserves turf in backyards up to 500 square feet, or 45% of the backyard. So these are the pictures of the warm season turfs. These turfs are not prohibited. These are allowed under the current ordinance. So these are the two most common successful turfs here in Aurora. The one is called Blue Grama. Looks a little different, works very well for some things, and uses roughly one third the water of a cool season turf. The other one that's probably going to be a little more popular is the buffalo grass. Buffalo grass, as you can see aesthetically, looks very similar to some of the cool season turfs. Also uses one third of the water. Doesn't work really well in heavy traffic areas. So this works well for kids who go out periodically and want to play in it, or pets. But if you want to put a volleyball game once a week on this turf, it's probably not going to work as well. So, but these turfs, again, are allowed. The ordinance does not prohibit the programming of these turfs. In fact, by default, it will encourage these. Exceptions. So we did have a lot of interactions with developers, got a lot of feedback, some of which we were able to incorporate into the ordinance and adjust as we went along. So this ordinance is proposed to be effective January 1st, 2023, but site plans that were approved before that would be exempt. So they would be able to move forward with their prior approval. Alley load products, we do have some single family housing products in Aurora where turf is not practical or possible in a backyard. So this ordinance would allow cool season turf in front yards in those applications. So if they can't have turf in the backyard, they could have it in the front yard. Then there's another exception built in. Some of our larger developments have site plans approved in some of their areas and not in other areas. This allows the approval of what we're calling transition zones. So a developer can come in and say, hey, we were grandfathered in this area and it's going to transition to non-grandfathered here. So we have high water use turf here, low water use landscape here. Will be allowed through the site planning process to transition. So it's not a stark difference in those developments. They can integrate some cool season turfs into the new site plan as long as they remove some from the old grandfathered plans. So it allows those exceptions. Again, those exceptions are based on some of the feedback that we got from developers and home builders that made sense. So we adapted to those exceptions. The UDO is also expanding the use or the allowable use of synthetic turf to be used as substitutes. So I get questions about where does synthetic turf make sense? It can get hot sometimes. One of the things allowed under this new ordinance moving forward now, for example, will be synthetic turf in front yards, synthetic turf in some of the other applications where you've got trees, you've got vegetative cover, like I mentioned earlier. So in a front yards are still required to have trees. The trees provide shade. It works really well with synthetic turf if done correctly. Synthetic turf, again, without shade can heat up like on days like we're dealing with right now today. So again, this allows synthetic turf to be applied more broadly through the developments where it makes sense. So we did get that feedback from some of the builders and developers as well. And so we've expanded the allowed use of synthetic turf. Next, water-wise requirements. So this is what's in the UDO. I talked a little bit about the trees. We require trees in those common spaces in the front yards, both ornamental and shade. We require 50% plant coverage for these landscapes. So we're not going to see just rocks and cactus, just rocks and mulch. We're going to have a lot of vegetative cover out there. These plants, though, use considerably less water, so we're still able to achieve the water savings goal associated with the ordinance. We also have landscape features that people can choose from that allow some fun elements and some aesthetically pleasing things. Earthen berms, boulders, small walls, decorative stone, fences, things like that can be incorporated in these landscapes. So with that, here are a few pictures of what we're trying to get away from. Turf, again, that's aesthetic, where it's not really usable. And these are the landscapes we're trying to go towards. So again, combination of trees, shrubs, bushes, low water use vegetation that adds a lot of color and still has a lot of the environmental benefits, maybe more in some cases than the turf. So with that, we've got a few more pictures here. We're joined today by the Denver Botanic Garden. Annie's here to show us a few things that they've done in these spaces. Again, some of the pictures I've shown are existing developments within Aurora today. If anybody's curious on where some of these are, you can let me know, and I can tell you where you can go see some of these. Again, not really ugly landscapes. These are pretty appealing. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Annie Barrow with Denver Botanic Garden. Annie's going to walk through a few, again, visual slides showing what can be done in these spaces with these types of ordinances. And then when Annie's done, open it up for questions and discussion. So Annie, are you there?
Thanks, Marshall. I am.
Okay, and I'll have
Everyone
to
for
slides, so
making
let me
time
know
for
when
me
you want to
today.
rotate.
Okay. Thanks for making time for me today. So I am the manager of our horticulture outreach programs, and those programs are aimed at achieving sustainable landscapes that are incredibly attractive. I don't know what happened to the slides there, Marshall. I just see you.
Somehow I lost my sharing capability. It went away. So I still need to share. I still have the presentation. Whoever controls the sharing. Okay. I'll go back. Sorry about that.
So I'm just going to walk through a few examples of some of the projects we've done in the good. I just went by it the other day. This is at Colfax and Kipling, a 1 mile median driving west. Next slide, please. So here, if any of you have gone down Bellevue, anywhere between I-25 and University Boulevard, this is what it looked like before. We work with Greenwood Village and their mayor and the city council and their landscape architects to develop a plant palette. Next slide, please. That would be colorful and showy and of interest all season round. And here again, you can see what we transitioned from, basically red mulch and some failing trees to a lush, colorful landscape with perennials, grasses, trees, shrubs, etc. And this landscape does probably use about 1 to 2 inches of irrigation per month, which is still very reasonable. So please check that out if you get a chance. Next slide, please. So this is one of the things that we're learning as we're getting out there and putting these landscapes in, is that we're finding that if you do things with the best horticultural practices possible, you can get a lot of growth in one season. So this is the Boulder County Courthouse. They have an Art Deco themed building and fountain. And you can see the plants on the left. That was in May where we went ahead and planted. You can see the small plant there on the right bottom of that picture. And then on the far right, that's that same planting in August. So again, like the vegetation coverage is so important. We don't want to have landscapes that are just rock, just cactus. And I actually tend to stay away from the term xeric because it just brings to mind and connotes that kind of arid look. But this is what's possible. Next slide, please. So Cherry Creek North is a business district just south of the gardens, and we worked with them last year to do several of their medians and right-of-ways. And so here's the before, and you can see they were using annual pots, and they had some a hedge, but nothing too exciting. We went ahead and worked with their contractor to co-design. Next slide. that we transitioned to this here. So this was actually put in September, and this was picture taken that September. So I went by this year, and they're actually overwatering it. So, which is a great thing, right? So I told them to cut back off on the water, and the plants are growing and doing really well. And what's nice about these medians and the right-of-ways is they're just really highly visible, right? Everybody drives by them and walks by them. This is a very pedestrian space. People use the space walking about, shopping. So our community can see great examples of beautiful landscapes that are really low water and that are just right there for them to touch and experience in that place making sense. Next slide, please. So we work with Northern Water, and they provide a $20,000 match grant to grantees. And this is the community complex at Evans, which is sort of the sister city of Greeley. And this is where they had a parking lot that was just rocks, a few shrubs, and we went ahead and transitioned to what you see here. And that's, again, the same season as it was installed. So I'll be going back this year. We're doing phase 2 for them. They'll be proceeding, and I'll be updating these pictures on our website so you can keep an eye on the progress. Next slide. This is another example of a turf conversion that we did with Northern Water. The town of Severance, this is their town hall, and obviously just a lot of turf not being used. And the next slide. Because this was the town hall, we decided to make this a demonstration garden. So in partnership with Plant Select, we made this into a demonstration garden that has signage for the plants and information on where to find these kinds of plants and what they are. Again, this is probably only 1 year after it was installed, and you can see here the right-of-way. That's a really great area where turf is not being used usually. So that's another great opportunity to do some water savings in the landscape. Next slide. Okay, that's it. So this is the link to our website. We offer planting designs, detailed planting designs. We can work with landscape architects to sort of do a peer review to make sure the right plants are being used. We can design demonstration gardens for you. We're really looking forward to helping you out in any way we can with your sustainable landscapes. Any questions?
I'm going to go, we're a little bit over time on the presentation, so I do want to open it up for presentations. Marshall, I know we do the water-wise medians, and we have some great examples in the city. Did you have examples of those, or?
I didn't. Again, in the interest of time, we limited kind of the pictures that we put in here, but we do have some medians, some of which were planted recently, others of which are doing a little better now. So I can get more examples to anybody who's interested. We're also, I will note, looking forward to partnering with Denver Botanic Gardens in some additional spaces. And I will point out we are updating our signage this year in the Waterwise Garden outside the AMC and removing turf on the east side of the AMC next year.
And the program is still available for our rebate program with the Xeriscape, correct?
It is correct.
Okay.
And we've expanded that too. So we now are working with more and more commercial entities in addition to the residential. That just changed this year and last year. So more and more opportunities to do large scale conversions like we just saw from Annie.
Okay, very good. Questions from council members?
Mayor Pro Tem.
I heard Councilmember Coombs and then Councilmember Marcano.
All right, thank you. So thank you so much for that presentation. It was incredibly helpful. Marshall, I had first one question about the Colorado River cuts. So 25% of our water comes from the Colorado River. So that's an obvious direct impact of the cuts. Is there a possibility to impact on our other water rights? Like if there were more senior users that said that we were harming their rights, could we be required to do swaps or augmentation water or things like that from our other basin sources besides the Colorado River?
Yeah, very good question. All of our supplies in Colorado, or probably any region like Colorado, are somewhat interconnected and somewhat separate. So I'm going to punt a little bit on your question by saying we have a whole day set aside in August with council to talk about the interconnectedness, the limitations, and the financial implications associated with all of our water supplies. So we plan on getting into a lot more detail than we ever have, but it is going to take probably 6 or 8 hours to do that.
Okay, I'll accept the punt, but just suggest that even though only 25% of our water supply comes from the Colorado River, this is extremely serious for us. And I believe that in an oversimplified sense, we could certainly say that our other supplies could be impacted by this decision.
You are absolutely right. And we are seeing those impacts already in that water providers who were never involved in the South Platte previously are now bidding against Aurora and competing against us to acquire supplies we had targeted decades ago and are in the process of acquiring. So we're seeing costs go up. We're seeing supplies become more limited because more and more people want to acquire those. So we're seeing very direct impacts in primarily the South Platte. We're seeing slightly different impacts in the Arkansas, but also direct impacts there.
So just wanted to kind of highlight that seriousness. Can I ask other questions, Mayor Pro Tem? Is that okay?
Sure, we're going to be way over on time, but go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
This is a very important issue. So my other questions are about, you said we're forward looking, and the mayor mentioned this is a tax on current residents if future development continues to be high water use. But my question is, if we aren't backward looking, if we aren't looking at our current lawns in anything more than the kind of incentive capacity that we currently are, and we're not looking at our current golf courses, isn't that a tax on future residents to kind of benefit current residents? And given that, can we look at making all current golf courses be more water wise? Like, are there conservation methods for golf courses that we're not currently looking at? And can we be more aggressive? Maybe not to the degree of Las Vegas, though maybe yes, to the degree of Las Vegas, on non-programmable in parks, golf courses, and residential.
Absolutely, we can, and absolutely we will. This ordinance, while it's forward-looking, will stand on its own and put us in a good position forward-looking. We have a lot of additional opportunities backward-looking. We've started some of those efforts, but what we need to do and what I can commit is that we will do a better job compiling those, setting goals, creating a program, potentially with the help of the Water Policy Committee, to bring back and capture more, be more aggressive on the backward looking, and do a better job communicating what we've been doing. We haven't done a very good job communicating some of that either.
Councilmember Marcano?
Sorry, I have just one more. I'm sorry. Okay. And that is, why wait for implementation until January 1st? I understand that there are development projects currently in the pipeline, but couldn't we just say anything that's currently in the pipeline is accepted? And the reason I ask this, and my concern is, are we asking for a rush on development applications being submitted to try to push through and get done by January 1st? And then for people to say, oh, well, I had my stuff in, so why didn't I get to go ahead? And that creates a really difficult situation for planning and development services, as well as the water department and all of the other folks that work on getting those development plans through. Like, are we asking for a lot of complaints about how long our development process takes and how onerous it is by people who want to get done by January 1st because that's the day, instead of saying, if you're already in the process, you're good. But folks moving forward, once this gets a yes vote, like, you're done.
Very good question. And that was exactly the struggle we went through with when to make it effective and what to base it on. So the site plan approval, one of the reasons we're proposing January 1st is to account for those projects that are already in process and in queue. It would be very difficult for somebody to start a site plan process in the fall, for example, and get approval. Well, I say fall. Early fall, they probably could. Late fall, it would be very difficult to start it and get it approved by January. We will see some rush to some degree, but we are working with developers. We think with some of the larger ones, what we'll see a little more of is the discussion of those transition zones. That's what we're hopeful for. So the January 1st, 2023 and the site plan approval were our attempt at coming up with that balance that you were talking about.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Marcano, and then I think I heard Councilmember Sundberg.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you, Marshall and Annie, for the presentation. Marshall, I have a couple of questions for you here. So the first is, can you tell us who the largest water users are, both in the public and private sector in the city?
I can tell you, yes, the largest, actually the largest is our own Parks Department. So we are the largest, and that's where, as Councilman Coombs talked about earlier, we've got lots of opportunities with that large user. The 2 school districts are on the top 5 lists, so both Cherry Creek and Aurora Public Schools, and we think there are significant opportunities with both of them as well that we need to ramp up. Niagara Bottling is a significant user, probably not to the surprise of anybody. And shoot, I had the number 5. Those are 4 of the top 5 right there.
Okay. And I guess my question is, since this ordinance, which I'm supporting, is forward-facing, what is kind of the strategy then to look back at some of our existing public sector use? Obviously, I know the city's doing what it can to, cut back on use, but I'm concerned about, frankly, about the Niagara bottling facility and other large private sector users like that. I don't feel it's okay, when we're asking our residents to make cuts, when we ourselves are making cuts, to be giving that much water out for profit, and when it's our most precious resource in this region.
Yeah, good and hard question. Some of the school districts and the city are on the list because of outdoor irrigation. Mm-hmm. So we've done a lot of calculations on the value or the return to the ratepayers and future developers on converting those spaces. So what you will be seeing here in the near future, and we've been ramping this up, but again, kind of slowly, and we need to get more aggressive, is incentives for those outdoor irrigation users where we can actually, through water funds, pay for conversions, and then we get a return. That's frankly one of our cheapest new water sources that we can go after, is if we can convert outdoor irrigable spaces. And so we're planning to ramp that up. Now, indoor uses, some commercial uses like Niagara, since they bottle the water and send it away, we don't actually have a great solution to reduce Niagara's use. They have, I will tell you, they've talked to us about expanding a couple of times, and we've avoided an expansion. So we've done that. But getting them to reduce the water use in their facility, we've not had any luck with those discussions. There are some other indoor uses, commercial uses, cooling towers, for example, with the new ordinance, and we do have a companion fee adjustment that we're bringing forward that's going to charge more for consumed water than for recoverable water. And when that goes into effect, that we're proposing in the budget process later this year, it will strongly financially encourage efficiencies in things like cooling towers or a swimming pool, things like that, where the water can be reused and recovered and reused and recovered over and over again. We'll see more and more of that. So we have ideas in a couple of spaces.
Marshall, I'm going to cut you off because we've got other questions coming.
Okay. No.
All right.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. And I just have one last one, Mayor Pro Tem, if I may. Thank you. And Marshall, we can, if you want to finish that last thought offline, I'm happy to talk to you in more detail about this. But what then is going to be the plan for our existing residents? Because we need to also make cuts with our existing, with the existing parts of the city. Because my big concern is I don't think it's fair to go back and say, hey, we allowed you all to have these kinds of, turfs and, landscaping, setups in the past, but now you need to, pay for the transition. So what can we, what's your plan with Aurora Water to, I think, make folks whole and help, from my perspective, I'd like to see us subsidize that transition because it's not an option really with the crisis that we're facing down. It's a necessity. So is that something that you're able to do as is, or will you need further council action to make that happen as well?
We'll need council approval in the budget process. What you're going to see is we are ramping up our incentive programs. We currently pay people for materials, but with the cost of water supply doing what it's doing, we can now start paying them some of the other costs, the labor delivery costs, for example. So we're going to be increasing our incentive programs. And I will tell you that even before we've increased the incentive programs, this year, with all the discussion on water supply and challenges, we're seeing more activity in that space, more people wanting to do conversions than we've ever seen historically before. So we are excited. We do think there will be some implications. We may need more staff. We may need to spend more money. But again, like you said, it's going to be more equitable to our citizens, and we'll get the financial returns on the water supply side.
All right, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Sundberg.
Thank you, Annie and Marshall, for the presentation. I believe all of us realize mostly the growth that's going to occur in Aurora, especially Northeast Aurora, the looming shortage of water, and the bold action that we need to take. PROS, Parks, Recreation, and Open Space, even just tomorrow is beginning a master plan study involving the public that will conclude in the second quarter of 2023. On how they can make substantial cuts and conversions. So we're looking forward to that. A task force on additional ideas and savings for water, I think, is a good idea that could go through the Water Policy Committee. And we'll look at that and recruit some different outside and various diverse thoughts on what can we do, even with the public school system, Cherry Creek and APS. Now, with respect to the plan and the mayor's ordinance plan here, I think most of us can agree on nearly everything, even the golf course part of it. But when it comes to the residential piece with the backyard and the front yard, I know that there are differing opinions. So I would like to make an amendment right off the bat. And I would like to propose an amendment that allows 700 square feet of backyard space only, or 45%, whatever's less.
Hey, that was supposed to be mine, Steve.
Okay. Reiterating. So up to 700 in the backyard, which would probably be cut low automatically by the 45% rule. And then allowing the front yard to have warm season grass or artificial turf. Okay. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sundberg. Other comments or questions?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Murillo.
I heard Murillo, Zavonik, and Lawson.
Kaufman.
Who? Oh, Kaufman. Sorry, not Zavonik.
Yeah, Zavonik too, but I was in the mix. I don't know where.
Okay, let's go with Murillo,
Yeah.
Zavonik, Lawson, then Kaufman.
Okay. Thank you. I'm excited to see this move forward. Early into my terms on council, I worked with our water department to bolster up our rebate program. So that was actually going to be my question, is to see if there was any funding increase needed. But it sounds like that's already coming through the pipeline. So I guess I just wanted to comment that especially Ward 1, we have the big yards in the front and the back. I think from an aesthetic standpoint, I always get, we get code complaints when things are not compliant. I would love, and in that request, I don't know if it's how feasible it is, but to understand kind of the kind of the cost that we're saving even just in code complaints. Because I know we get a ton of folks who do complain, and I wonder how much that would increase capacity from our staff. So I just wanted to support that and share that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Zabonic?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Marshall, I think that, and Councilmember Sundberg touched on this a little bit, 2/3 of what I call this proposal will say the golf courses and then the medians, and even the areas of turf that are in commercial areas. I think there's a broad agreement that we should do something about that going forward. Just the strain that there is on water supply in Colorado, it's necessary for us to do something. The question is, how do we make sure that we're balancing meeting these reduction of consumption goals, but at the same time allowing for flexibility and growth in our city? We're not sure what this would do to our new home market, given that we would be leading, which I think is a good thing as a city. But I wanted to talk through some potential challenges that we'll face. One would be the increase the base cost of each home that this water-wise landscaping would incur. And if there's some options, I know you mentioned a new fee structure. Is there a way to address the increase to the base cost for the homes through a reduction in tap fees? That's question one. And two, is there a way to allow for more flexibility? I understand that there might be some challenges with enforcement, but what I want to make sure is that we're not stifling our new housing market relative to our neighbors as we're trying to make these reductions. I think the goal should be meet the water reductions. And if we can do it by allowing flexibility and not increasing cost to consumers on the base price of their homes, we should explore those options.
Marshall, did you want to respond to the reduction in tap fees?
I don't see Marshall.
Maybe he's gone.
Oh no, there he is. Or he's just, his name's there, but nobody.
Marshall Brown? Okay, maybe we'll come back to have him respond to your question. Councilmember Lawson?
Yes.
Oh, you're breaking.
Councilman Lawson, I can't hear you.
Hear me? No?
You're kind of cutting in and out.
Okay, I'll just come back.
Oh, no, now you're
Oh,
good.
okay, we got you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, now we can.
Now you're good.
I'm sorry. So Marshall, I have a question for you. In your presentation, you stated that if we don't do this, and of course, you know, we definitely need to have a conservation plan. If we don't do this, then it can impact future growth. Well, we're sprawling. And then I guess my question is, if we do this and we continue to sprawl or do density, depending on how this council goes now or in the future, are we really going to be cutting, I guess, or making an impact on conservation? Because we're going to have this plan in effect, but we're still growing and we're still building and building and building and building. And so we're building more sprawling than we're doing density. So I just wanted to know if there's going to be a difference in that by doing either or. Should this council or future council decides to go in a different direction with how we're building and growing in the city?
Yeah, so definitely sprawl versus heightened density make a big difference on water use. So what we're trying to do with this ordinance is set criteria that will limit water use essentially for sprawl. If we go to more of a density model, water use is going to go down naturally anyway. So this is setting the parameters for the potential of kind of the sprawl scenario.
Okay. And Councilmember Lawson, did you have any other questions? Okay, we'll go back to Councilmember Zabonic. I don't know if you want to restate your question to Marshall.
Marshall, did you get a chance to hear? I can restate it in a brief.
No, I got booted. I don't know what happened. Sorry.
That's okay. So the gist of it was the addressing what would likely be an increase to the base cost of homes as a result of requiring the water-wise front yards. Is there a way, you mentioned the new fee structure with the consumed water and reusable, is there a way that we could offset that cost through reduction of tap fees? That's first part of the question. Second part is, recognizing the need to meet the goal of the water consumption use, is there, and I know enforcement is the challenge here, and we've had these discussions, but is there a way to provide more flexibility in a way to not, or to minimize future home growth or new home development in the city? Just recognize that we don't know what this may or may not do to our new housing market, given that we will be the first city to have this. And again, that's a good thing on one hand, but there's some uncertainty there. I want the city to continue to grow. I recognize we need to have water to do that. So finding the balance between the two. So can we, what is are there options with flexibility, one, and then two, on the tap fee to offset those increase in base costs that will just be passed to consumers ultimately?
Yeah, good questions. So the cost, I'll talk about the cost first. So with the limitations, the current draft of the ordinance, if a new single family home comes in under the new ordinance, they're looking at a tap fee of $3,000 less than if a single family residential home comes in grandfathered or not under the new ordinance. So there's a $3,000 lower tap fee that we're going to charge to the developers or the home builders as they move forward under the new ordinance. So and tap fees vary on a number of things, but if there was a $25,000 water connection fee for what's being built today, that connection fee would be $22,000 under the new fee structure. So we are creating the savings to offset what we think is all or most of the costs in the landscaping difference. And we tied that directly to the cost or the value of the water. So that's good news there. The second question with the flexibility, like we've talked about, is a little harder for us because we don't have really any good enforcement capabilities for backyards, and most of the home builders don't install backyards. Now, one thing we could do to simplify that a little bit, and what one of the municipalities that's coming along shortly after us is apparently thinking they will do, is they're contemplating a requirement for the home builders to install front and backyards before the CO. So they're saying, hey, if you want to choose where to put the turf, you just install both. You have the requirement, and then we don't care where the 500 square feet goes. Now, with the proposed amendment earlier for the 700, it would make it, we would lose the water savings if we go to 700 and open up the flexibility. So I would view it kind of as either we do a 700 in the backyard or we can open it up to flexibility. The simplest way would be to require home builders to install front and backyards before CO. There are a bunch of other steps we could go through to try to afford that flexibility, but it does become pretty burdensome to administer. But we could do it.
And then Mayor Kaufman, I think, was next.
Yeah, so I was just, I think what I'm hoping that the members will do is to appreciate the challenges that we're actually in, to understand the magnitude of this problem and to vote accordingly. So I would speak against both changes. The fact is that there is a reduction in the tap fees by virtue of going with this. I think we saw some photos of water-wise landscaping, and it's not all just rocks and cactus. And so I think it can be appealing. And I just think I think we should stay with the 500 or 45 square feet, whatever's less, and move this proposal forward.
Okay, I'm going to recognize myself. It's interesting because I had talked to both Marshall and you, Mayor, about either 700 or 750 feet, and I was told by both of you that that was acceptable, so now it's not. So that's interesting. I understand that this is a serious matter in terms of making sure that we conserve water for future uses. I think Councilmember Lawson and I were probably one of the two only council members years ago that voted against annexing a lot of land, because one of the studies that came forward in all this annexation was the fact that we were going to end up with a huge, I think it was like a $15 million deficit. So, you know, we do need to consider future growth and how we're going to approach future annexations as well. My question is also on the medians. I thought currently we do xeriscape all of our medians. Aurora Parkway, Arapahoe Road has been xeriscaped in my ward, and I believe Tower Road as well. Marshall, do we xeriscape medians?
We do the water-wise landscape in most of the city medians currently, but it's voluntary. So there's not a requirement to do that. It is done voluntarily. And there are
city medians are not voluntary. The city medians are owned by the city. So we do water-wise those.
Right. There's no requirement in code that makes them be water-wise.
Okay.
There is a financial incentive because we don't put irrigation in those. So we're able to do twice as many miles of median for the same amount of cost by doing the water-wise landscaping. But what I meant was just it's not required by code that that's what they have to be.
Okay. Okay. So, but we do those for the city, and then I know for developers, do we require water-wise or we don't because of code? So it's voluntary on their
They would
side.
have the same incentives to go that direction.
Okay, and then you said the $3,000 tap fee will be it would be reduced to $3,000 for a single family home, and that's not in the ordinance. So that would just be in what?
That is we're bringing forward a connection fee recommendation through the budget process this same year, and it would be effective also January 1st. And with that proposed connection fee modification, that's where the $3,000 difference will be created.
Okay. And then my other question is on the front yards where we would say no turf except for what was it, the bluegrass, buffalo grass, or the blue grama? The blue grama didn't look very attractive. Like you mentioned, that's probably not going to be a good alternative.
Yeah, not as good if kids want to go play in the front yard or if pets want to use it. The blue grama is probably not as good as the buffalo grass. It definitely looks different as well. So it will have appropriate applications, but they're probably not as broad as maybe the buffalo grass.
Okay, and then on the site plan, you said January 1 of 2023. So anyone that is going through the process, as we do have had issues, I mean, we have had issues with approving site plans and going through all the comments and resubmittals. So if someone is in process, but they don't get approved, they're not going to qualify?
Well, it will depend a little bit. So if they're in process now and city delays cause that to miss the deadline, then they would be grandfathered.
Okay.
If they start the process December 15th, no, they would not be grandfathered.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments? Council members of Sonic?
I had a quick follow-up on the flexibility and in terms of the ability to reach the water consumption savings. If we allowed the flexibility the way that you described it, which would give the home builders that option of doing front or back, but they have to put it in, can we still achieve the same goals that we set out to?
If we stick with the 500, yes.
So what I'm hearing you say, and this is counter to what the mayor said, is that we can in fact address this very significant issue and grant flexibility and address the cost issue, which we're going to later, by granting flexibility, we can still do it as long as we stick to the 500 square feet.
Mayor.
Okay.
Mayor.
Yeah, but that you have to write it to where what you're doing that's different today, the home builder usually just does a front yard. And so here you're mandating the home builder to do the front and backyard and thereby run those plans through the city so the city can ascertain that it's no more than 500 square feet front and back.
And Mayor Pro Tem,
Go ahead.
that would be on the lots that want to have it in the front yard, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, we hadn't, yes, we could figure that out. We could do it that way. That's not originally what I was thinking. The simplest way would just be mandate everybody install front and backyards. But good point. If they're not proposing any cool season turf in the front yard, we could figure out how to view that differently. You are correct. We could do that.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, Marshall, you know, on that, how I know if the builder puts in the front yard and then it's up to the homeowner to put it in the backyard, then it's very difficult to enforce.
Yep.
Whether or not it stays under 500 square feet. However, if you, how easy is it to enforce? Let me just reiterate this. If in fact you're allowing the 500 square feet to be developed, to be placed in the front yard and backyard, and the aggregate then would be well, it'd have to, I don't know how you do the 45% rule, but it'd be 500 square, let's say 500 square feet.
Yeah.
How difficult is that? Well, you're probably potentially you're increasing the amount of turf because on smaller lot homes right now the way it's written is 500 square feet or 45%, whichever is less. How much of an issue is this from increasing the square footage of turf allowed potentially mathematically and the enforcement part?
So if what we did is said that lots that install a water-wise front yard, they don't have to put the backyard in, then the same 500 or 45 would apply to those.
Okay.
Then what we're looking at is the ones where a builder or home buyer, somebody wants to put the front yard in and use all or some of the 500 there. If we then require that the builder before CO installs the backyard, we would have inspection. We're out there inspecting those conditions anyway, so we could capture that in the inspection, and as long as they're compliant, it would be relatively straightforward to administer. And as long as we stick to the 500 total limitation, then the water use difference would be relatively small, if not insignificant. If we increase the square footage beyond the 500, then that's the scenario where the water use starts getting bigger and bigger.
But you would be allowed by virtue, mathematically, you would be allowing potentially some more turf than you would otherwise have.
A little bit.
It's a smaller lot. You wouldn't be using the, you wouldn't be using the 45% rule then, right? It would just be 500 square feet.
The 45% would still apply to the backyard, but
Okay.
under this scenario, they could put, say, 300 in the backyard and then 200 in the front yard. But I think, again, the number of those, if you combine it with the number of people who actually want the front yard and the backyard, would be relatively small.
But if you said, if you took the formula, 500 square feet or 45%, whichever is less, and then allow that number to be broken up in the front yard and the backyard, then that would be the same. So then we're not increasing the amount of turf.
Right. As long as we keep the 500 square foot cap, we're only increasing water use a little bit, as long as we keep the 500.
Okay.
Marshall, this is Francois. What does 500 square feet look like?
Yeah, so 10 by 50 is 500 square feet, or
Can you play baseball?
Well, you're not gonna. Nobody can play baseball in their backyard today. Well,
some
I shouldn't say nobody, but you can't have a baseball field in a backyard today. You can play wiffle ball. You're not going to have a football field in your backyard. So 500 square feet lets you play with the kids. Small activities, badminton, croquet, wiffle ball, baseball, it would be enough to do that. if your kids are teenagers, you're probably going to want to go to the park or the school and play on the actual fields. So it's really going to be for small kids, pets, the uses we typically see in backyards. But again, as the kids get bigger and want to play full-fledged football, you're probably not going to do that in very many backyards anyway, even if without this.
And then my last question is, if we restrict that amount in the backyard, once it's in, are we going to go enforce every backyard in the city of Aurora to see if they've just increased their turf?
Yeah, good question. So again, I've talked about a little bit our enforcement and administrative challenges. What we're going to do over the next few years, few by meaning like 3 to 8 years, is we're going to track water use. We have AMI meters. So we'll track water use, and if we see spikes in water use, we will have the ability to connect with those customers and say, hey, we saw a spike in the water use. So we have some limited capabilities, but we're not planning right now hard enforcement, if that was the question.
Other questions or comments?
Yep. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you, ma'am. I just want to say that I really don't think we should be amending this to add more or to overly complicate what's been presented. I just want to remind you all that, the gravity of what we're facing down really requires us to take, bold steps now, and we have a lot more work to do looking backwards as well. So I would just strongly recommend that we just move forward the base ordinance and then get to work on finding other ways to conserve water as well.
Other comments or questions? Yes, Councilmember Coombs.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is already not aggressive enough for the problems that we really face. So not to no, but hell no to making any changes that would increase the water use at all.
What's actually decreasing overall? Well, or the new plan.
But increase for what was.
And even an amended plan would still decrease.
Right, that increase over what was the goal of this one.
Gotcha. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so I know Councilmember Sundberg suggested 700 square feet in the backyard. Is this, I imagine he can just make an amendment on the floor versus during study session, because we don't do amendments during study session. So with that, I believe we conclude this 3B. Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, first, you still have to move it forward. So if you would just ask if there's any opposition to move it forward.
Yes. Okay. Is there any objection to moving this forward? Okay, seeing none, it will move forward.
Okay, I'll take the
Thank you.
virtual. Right, thank you, Marshall. I'll take the virtual gavel back here. Item number 3C, intergovernmental agreement for Wild Horse Reservoir permit application cost. Alexandra Davis.
Yes, hi, good evening. Thank you for your time on this. This agreement is a collection agreement with the Bureau of Land Management, or the BLM. The Bureau of Land Management owns approximately 200 acres of land that will be partially inundated by Wild Horse Reservoir. And in order to inundate that land, the BLM requires that the city of Aurora, enter into a right-of-way from the BLM. Aurora holds other rights-of-ways with the BLM for projects like Spinney Mountain Reservoir. So this is not uncommon. It's something that we have dealt with generally and regularly. Aurora submitted a SF 299 right-of-way application on March 22nd, 2022. A lot of twos in that. And because it's a federal agency and it's federal agency land, the BLM and the Aurora Water must follow the National Environmental Policy Act, which requires the BLM to analyze the environmental impacts through an EIS. There are also federal mineral rights on this land that underlie quite a large portion of the Wild Horse Reservoir footprint. And these also create a federal nexus that triggers the NEPA Policy Act. So that process, part of this process of following the NEPA is to reimburse the BLM for staff time associated in completing the right-of-way application and the environmental impact analysis that is required. The reimbursement is very common for all major projects such as building reservoirs. The estimated cost for this work is approximately $230,000 and includes a 10% contingency for unforeseen or unseen items. The payment will be made in advance and then billed against. And the BLM will issue quarterly statements telling us how much we have used of the funding and what work was completed. And then they will also look ahead to future work and inform us if additional funds will be needed. Any additional funding may require additional City Council approval. So I will stop there and see if there are any questions about this collection agreement.
Questions for staff? Seeing none, thank you very much. Is there any opposition to moving item number 3C forward? Seeing none, item number 3C will move forward. Item number 3D. Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you.
2022 private activity bond assignment. Alicia Montoya.
Good evening, everyone. I am Alicia Montoya, the Housing and Community Development Manager, and I have prepared a presentation to go over the private activity bond or PAB. So let me just get that set up 1 second. All right, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Awesome. So this is again to just go over private activity bond. We get an assignment every year, and we have been historically utilizing that for affordable housing, and we have made our assignments or are making our assignments assignment recommendations for 2022. So we'll do the overview of that, and then we are also currently going under the next round of community development investment. So for the summer, we do 2 rounds. We did the first round, which is the one that we utilize to assign private activity bonds and other HUD funds. We are going through the second round where there's no PAB, but we are doing the remaining funds of home and CDBG. Just a little background on private activity bonds. It's a special class of tax exempt bond that mainly benefits private non-government borrowers. This can be issued by states, local governments, of course, local municipalities as well. And the main benefit is that there is the interest paid to the bondholder is exempt from federal income tax. So it makes the borrowing cost a little bit lower for them. There's a special formula. It is based on population, and each locality gets their assignment each year. The private activity bond can be used for different things like affordable multifamily housing, single-family mortgage revenue bonds, mortgage credit certificates, industrial development bonds, qualified redevelopment, and solid waste disposal. Like I said, we have been historically using the private activity bond for affordable housing, and so we did that again this year. Back on May 9 of 2022, we brought recommendations for our assignments, including the private activity bond funds, for just $21 million. And the 3 projects that we assigned the private activity bond to were the Fitzsimmons Gateway Apartments. The second one was Aurora Metro Center Station, and the third one was Weatherstone Apartments. So in each one, creating over 200 units. So great projects. So Yeah, so that was approved back on May 9 during our regular city council meeting. This was presented by our director, Jessica Prosser. And right now, we need to assign the private activity bond to the Aurora Housing Authority so that it can be distributed to those projects.
Questions of staff? Further questions? I'm sorry, did you have more, Alicia?
Yeah, just a little bit more. I'm
Oh,
almost
sorry about that. I'm sorry.
That's
Go
okay.
ahead.
Maybe I'm going a little bit slow.
No, go ahead, please.
Oh, I am missing one question here. I am sorry. So that I guess the question is to you. Do you approve the assignment of the 21.3 million, which is the total PAV amounts, to be assigned to the Aurora Housing Authority?
Further questions of staff? Seeing none, is there a rejection to the request? Seeing none, then item number 3D will move forward. Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you.
Item number 4A, reverse setbacks around oil and gas facilities and an easement around plugged wells. Jeffrey Moore.
Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Thank you for your time this evening. Let me pull up my PowerPoint and I will begin our presentation.
Mayor.
I'm sorry, is it Councilmember Coombs?
No, it's Drunsky. This is an estimated 55 minutes and we're already an hour and a half into this study session without a break. If this truly is an hour-long presentation, can we please take a break?
Yeah, the time is now 8:02. We will stand in recess until 8:12. All right, council stands in recess. City Council for 18 July 2022 is called back into order. We are on item number 4A, reverse setbacks around oil and gas facilities and an easement around plugged wells. Jeffrey Moore, please continue.
Thank you, Mayor. Just want to confirm now everybody can see my slides, my title slide.
Yep.
Great, very good, thank you. My name is Jeffrey Moore. I'm the manager of the Oil and Gas Division for the City of Aurora, and thanks for your time this evening to talk about some important topics here. My presentation is going to be very informational. We are going to cover a bit of background definitions and terms. I feel like that's important to make sure that we all understand exactly what we're talking about in this category of setbacks. We'll talk about primary setbacks and reverse setbacks as well. Should you have any recommendations for changes to city code, I would work with city attorneys to craft an ordinance and come back to an additional study session to present that. So this is just the beginning of this process. We'll see if you want any changes. We are going to talk about two major topics tonight. The first is reverse setbacks. We'll define the terms and the measurements of those. We'll talk about what primary setbacks are and therefore what are reverse setbacks and how are those calculated at different entities. We will look at reverse setbacks in other jurisdictions. We will discuss the existing 150-foot reverse setback that's currently in city code. The second major topic is an easement around plugged wells. We'll talk about why and how wells are replugged, the easements that other jurisdictions have around plugged wells, and what's right for Aurora. I do want to make the distinction here at the beginning that the reverse setbacks do apply to producing wells only, and the easement around plugged wells applies to wells that have already ended their life and they're therefore plugged and abandoned. So just keep that in mind as we go through. All right, so starting with reverse setbacks. The first thing we've got to do is define some of the terms here. The first one is oil and gas location. That term refers to the physical area on the ground that's disturbed prior to the implementation of any of the oil and gas activities. In the operator agreements, we use the term well site. The industry would call this a well pad, and it may contain multiple wells or equipment. The other term that's often confused is oil and gas facility. In city code and at the state level, the term oil and gas facility refers to the actual equipment that's on the oil and gas location. So the wellheads, flow lines or pipes, tanks that are holding produced water or oil, and other surface equipment. So oil and gas location, oil and gas facility. There is an additional definition that's used at the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, and that is working pad surface. That is a subset, a smaller area than the oil and gas location, and it refers to the location after the drilling and completion activities are done, and the operator completes the interim reclamation, and the size of the pad shrinks down to a smaller amount. Again, those first two are used by both the state and the city. Working pad surface is currently only used by the state. Now let's look at this physically, visually. So here's an actual aerial photo of a site inside the city limits of Aurora. It's the Grande South. The site is near Powhatan Road and Jewel Avenue. It's constructed in 2017. The red outline that you see there on the screen is what we would call the oil and gas location. It's 4.4 acres in size. It's approximately 300 by 600 feet in size. Now, after the operator drilled the well, which is shown in the red dot there in the center of the screen, they came back later after the drilling and completion was done, and they shrunk the size of that down to the working pad surface. Working pad surface is shown here on the screen in a dashed or dotted line. You can see the size there has been reduced to almost half of the oil and gas location size. It's 2.7 acres, approximately 275 by 400 square feet. Now, the last part of this, again, is the oil and gas facilities. Now, I've shown those here in the screen in green. Now, again, the facilities are only the equipment, but you can draw some type of a line around those because some of the equipment is grouped together on the site. The well itself is the red dot in the center. The other equipment is tanks, pipelines, compressors, separators, and other types of equipment that are used, very standard in the production of oil and gas. Now, some other definitions that are used primarily at the state level that refer to the buildings. The first is residential building unit, or RBU, and that is what we think of as a residential structure. It can also apply to a manufactured or mobile home if that is being used for residential purposes, not as, for example, a contractor's trailer or something. CUGCC also defines building unit, which is a broader term that includes the RBU, but also includes a certain amount of square footage for commercial and warehouse space. And then finally, a high occupancy building unit, which is just as it sounds. It's a place where a lot of people congregate on either a daily basis or stay. So for example, a school or a hospital, a correctional facility of a certain size, an operating childcare center, or a multifamily dwelling such as an apartment that has at least 4 units. So RBU, building unit, and high occupancy building unit. Now, let's talk about what are primary setbacks. Primary setbacks are those that apply to the oil and gas operators. So when a house or a school is already in place, how far away does the oil and gas operator have to go in order to put their well in place? At the CUGCC, at the state level, there are several categories of primary setbacks. The first is 200 feet, and that's from any building, public road, above ground utility lines, and railroads. And the reason for that is a physical parameter that most drilling rigs are about 150 to 175 feet tall. And if something happened, if there was perhaps a wind event or something else incident, and the rig actually fell over onto the ground, they want to have space around that so that it doesn't hit any of these features. The other one that you've probably heard about that was implemented in 2021 is the 2,000-foot setback from existing residential building units, from RBUs, and from high occupancy building units. Now, that is the number that gets thrown around most often. There are 4 exemptions that allow drilling as close as 500 feet from RBUs and high occupancy building units, but the operator has to meet one of those 4 exemptions. One of the 4 exemptions is as simple as if the residents or the owners and the tenants all sign acknowledging that they're aware of the work that will be done and the location of the future oil and gas activities. Finally, there's a 2,000-foot setback from school facilities or child care centers, and there is no exemptions on that particular number. Now, in the city, we have a couple of primary setbacks also. 350 feet from existing and proposed parks and open spaces, city critical infrastructure. This is primarily freshwater supply lines, as we just talked about earlier, and domestic water supply wells. 500 feet from 100-year floodplains and 1 mile from existing or planned reservoir sites. So let's look at this again visually. You've got your RBU, your residence. There's a residential lot line around that. Now someone wants to come in and put in an oil and gas location with a facility, a working pad surface. The distance and the way those are measured at the CUGCC is they're measured from the RBU to the working pad surface. And that in general is 2,000 feet, but there are 4 exceptions that can allow that distance to be as low as 500 feet. So now we flip that around and talk about reverse setbacks. These apply when the oil and gas operations are already in place, and now someone wants to build a residence or a school or a high occupancy building unit. How far away do they have to go? Well, notably, there's none of those at the state level. The State Oil and Gas Conservation Commission does not deal with reverse setbacks, and no other state organization does either. At the city level, we have 150 feet that's in Aurora City Code. The history here, if you remember, it was put into City Code in 2012. It was inadvertently removed when the UDO was extracted from City Code. This council put it back in April of this year. The measurement of that is from the oil and gas facility, the equipment, to the residential lot line. Again, for a visual example, you've got your oil and gas location, your facilities, your working pad surface. Now someone wants to come in and put their RBU with a residential lot line around it. The measurement currently is from the equipment, from the facilities, to the residential lot line. That's how it's measured in current code. So let's take this concept and apply it back to the Grande South location. So we've got the oil and gas location, we've got the working pad surface, we've got our facilities. Now, if we draw a 150-foot polygon around all of the pieces of equipment on that location, that's what's shown in the blue outline with the dark shading on the screen. 150 feet from each of the pieces of equipment, the facilities on that surface. Inside that working pad surface, the WPS, there's about 2.7 acres of space, as I said before, and then outside of that is an additional 3.5 acres with that 150 feet setback. It's a total of 6.2 acres. Now, one of the questions that I get frequently is why are primary setbacks larger? Why is there a difference between primary setbacks and reverse setbacks? And are there some good reasons for that? I would mention at the beginning that primary setbacks are not simply a calculation of health risk. If they were, COGCC would not allow exemptions down to 500 feet with a simple signature of a resident. One of the acknowledgments is that the production phase, which is the longest phase of a well's life, typically has a lower risk of incidents than the drilling and completion phase. The drilling and completion phase is what happens up front at the beginning of a well's life. It's anywhere from a few weeks or months if there's a single well, or it could be many months if there are multiple wells on the site. But once that phase is done, then the well typically produces in Aurora for 20 to 30 years after that. A second reason is that there's an acknowledgement of protection of people in a residence from risks that were unknown at the time of the residence construction. So again, someone builds or buys a residence and they're unaware that an oil well might be in the future in their area. So there's an acknowledgement that that changes the metrics of how someone might look at that property. Someone builds a house, then later the oil well goes in, the person sees that oil well, they decide based on their life situation, their health profile, that they would prefer not to live there anymore. So if you don't know that, what the primary setback does is it makes the well be further away so you don't get into this situation. There's also the preservation of property values concept, which again, a person decides that the well's been drilled, they no longer want to live in their residence, they want to sell, but perhaps they don't get as higher price as they expected because now the well is there and they didn't know that. Those things change if the well was already in place and the person buying or building the residence can see the well in place. They can make a judgment on that prior to entering into the contract to buy or build. Now let's look at the impact of these reverse setbacks. So currently in the city, we have 32 oil and gas locations. I put WPS here for working pad surfaces because most of the locations we have are already at that stage of their productive life. The actual measured acreage of those 32 locations is 149 acres. Based on the operator agreements, we expect to have an additional 26 either standalone or expansion oil and gas locations in the future. That would be an additional 240 acres. That total is just under 400 acres for essentially all of the oil and gas that we expect to have in the city of Aurora. Now that could change in the future if additional lands are annexed, additional wells are annexed into the city, or if we have other operators that come in that want to explore some of that annexed area. Now, if we add in the current setback, which again is measured from the facilities, from the equipment, on those 58 working pad surfaces, we have an additional 200 acres there that would be off limits for residential development. It would be available for other types of development. So 392 and 203, that's just under 600 acres, just under 1 square mile for all of the oil and gas operations in the city. Now, there's been some proposals for what happens if we change the measurement or change the distance on this. The first thing that could be done is we could measure, instead of measuring from the facilities, from the equipment, we could measure as the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission does from the working pad surface. We would need to define that in city code because that term is not there, but that can be done. If we measured that at 150 feet, that would change that 203 number to 522 acres. If we then expanded that to 500 feet from the working pad surface, we'd be looking at over 2,000 acres of area that's currently would be off, not currently, would be off limits for residential building in the future. If we went to 1,000 feet, that would be 5,800 acres. Again, there is some overlap in these later numbers because we do have some places where well sites are closer than 1,000 feet together. And so as we begin to increase that setback distance, some of those do overlap. Finally, if we went to 2,000 feet, we would have approximately 15,000 acres or about 23 square miles that would be off limits to residential development. To kind of show you what that might look like, on the screen here is the primarily Ward 2 of the city. The city limits are in yellow. The various shades of green are current and proposed residential developments within the city. And the pink is other areas that do have an existing master plan. And then the white polygons with red outlines are the 2,000 feet around the working pad surfaces that would represent that 15,000 acres that would be off limits to residential development. I'll zoom in now on the southern area on the next slide. And again, just showing how that particular distance would impact various developments within the city. Talking about other jurisdictions which have done reverse setbacks. Again, a lot of information here, and I won't go through every detail on this slide, but I'll hit a couple of things. Arapahoe County has a 250-foot reverse setback. Broomfield primarily has a 200-foot setback from residential lot lines and a 500-foot from schools, between schools and locations, during a specific period of time, which is the permitting, construction, drilling, and completion of a well. They do up that to about 2,000 feet. It is unclear if that will be tested in the city of Broomfield, because Broomfield is publicly saying right now that they believe that they've had their last well drilled within the city limits of Broomfield and that they are not expecting any wells to be drilled in the future. Fort Collins has separated their reverse setbacks into two categories, RBUs and high occupancy building units, and you can see others on the list there. Aurora being at the bottom, again, 150 feet measured between the equipment, the facilities, and the residential lot line. Now, in summary, primary setbacks are addressed by both the state and the city. Reverse setbacks are only addressed by Aurora. Currently, it's 150 feet. We've discussed how it's measured. Council members previously proposed expanding the 150 feet to a greater distance and changing the measurement point from the facility or equipment to the edge of the working pad surface or the oil and gas location. My question will be, does council wish to implement any of these proposals or apply the setback beyond residences to other features such as schools? With your permission, I would like to just continue my presentation. I've got a few more slides on the second topic, but it does tie into this in some ways. So now let's talk about the permanent easement around plugged wells. So again, the reverse setbacks apply to producing wells. Now we're talking about at the end of a well's life, once a well is no longer producing, it's now plugged. What about that? So after production ends, a well is plugged. The process for that is placing cement inside the pipe, inside the wellbore. It's not totally full of cement. It's placed at certain intervals within the pipe. The pipe is cut off 5 feet below the surface, and the surface is reclaimed. Here are some photos of an example of a well that was plugged in Aurora and then later dug up and found to be replugged. And it's very simply a pipe with a metal plate welded onto the top. There's really nothing there to see at the surface. Plugged wells can be coded in two ways. One is dry and abandoned if they never produced at all. The other is P&A, or plugged and abandoned, if they did produce at some point in their life. We have about 30 wells that are DNA and 24 that are P&A, but we expect that to go to about 400 based on the 110 wells that we have currently drilling or producing, plus the additional wells that we expect by virtue of the operator agreements. So where are those wells? Well, there's 54 of those in Aurora. Most of those are north of I-70, and they kind of increase in concentration as you get close to Denver International Airport. Now, I am pleased to report that in the last year, that operators have replugged 10 of these wells, and you can see those in green dots there on the screen. We're going to talk about the reason for that in just a minute. In the past, we typically considered that the plugging of a well was the end of the story. However, as time goes on, as the industry goes on, we're learning that plugging of the well is not always the end of the story. All wells are expected to be replugged at some point in the future. There's very little information on this, but one study that we have found suggests that perhaps 50 years is around the life of steel and cement in contact with fluids down underground, and that after some period of time, there's likely to be some deterioration of the wellbore and some deterioration of the cement. The earliest well that was drilled in what is now the city limits of Aurora was drilled in 1917. Half of the wells that are currently plugged were drilled in the mid-50s to the mid-80s, and that is 50 to more years ago. So what are the risks from some of these old wells? The first is a slow leakage of hydrocarbons to the surface. Some jurisdictions have seen this in the metro area in less than 50 years. The Oil and Gas Division is initiating a proactive annual soil testing over the plugged wells that we have access to so that we can determine and confirm if there's any leakage of hydrocarbons or not. And then finally, deterioration of cement in the well can cause communication inside the pipe, the wellbore itself, between the hydrocarbon zones and the freshwater aquifers, which of course we do not want. Now, in order to replug a well, it's not complex, but it does take a lot of equipment. This is a photo I have of a well that was being replugged. This lot size here is about 220 by 170 feet. That's a little bit less than an acre, 0.85 acres. On this lot, some of the equipment that's used is there is a rig. This is a mobile rig that drives down the street. It's 8 feet wide when it's driving down the street, but when it's set up, it's double that. It's 16 feet wide. You also have pipe racks in order to drill out the cement that's there, that's deteriorating, and get back down to the bottom of the hole, which could be 8,000 feet or more. The operator has to have that much pipe laid out and ready to run into the wellbore. Those two pieces right there alone are about 90 feet once they're set up end to end. And there really is no way to get around that, no easy way to get around that. Other equipment on site, there's mud pumps, there's freshwater tanks, there's engine pumps and pump trucks that keep the fluids moving and the mud for the drilling and recirculating, and there's a drop side trailer. So all these things together, what does it mean for Aurora? Like I said, we have 54 wells plugged currently, up to 400 in the future, and we expect that someday all of those are going to need to be replugged. Sometimes wells are required to be replugged by the State Oil and Gas Commission before an operator can drill another horizontal well nearby that existing wellbore. Others would be replugged because they're showing some evidence of leaking. We have to have physical space around the plugged wells to site necessary equipment to replug them fully and safely. The Oil and Gas Division is proposing a 200-foot by 200-foot, which is slightly less than an acre, permanent well workover easement around all plugged wells, both wells that are currently plugged and wells that would be plugged in the future. The conditions there that we're looking for would be there'd be no permanent physical structures, neither residential nor commercial, within that space. There'd be access to a public road, no below-ground utilities within 10 feet of the well itself, the pipe, and an option for a variance request for the shape. It doesn't have to be a square, as long as the area is still roughly 40,000 square feet. Now, how can that easement space be used? Well, if it's in a rural area and it's being used for agriculture or livestock, that use can continue. There's no issues with that at all. If it's going to be developed, it could be a park, it could be an open space in a residential development. In a commercial development, it could be a parking lot. In the photo on your screen, that's a picture from Aurora. There's actually a plugged well there pretty close to where the tree is, a little bit inside on the grassy area. There's a plugged well right there, and it was recently replugged, and hopefully it will stay that way for many, many years to come, likely decades. But if it does need to be re-entered in the future, we have access to be able to get to it and do the work that's needed. And I will just add that when I say we, I don't mean the city of Aurora having liability here. If a well is determined to be leaking, it's the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission that has originally approved that plugging work and signed off on it, and they would be responsible and are responsible for the cost of replugging those wells. And so it's not the city that has liability in terms of the cost. One of the questions that I get from developers on this is, what about sometimes they say if we have an easement, we're not allowed to use that to count toward our development space. I've worked with our Director of Planning and Development Services, Janine Rustad, and she confirms that yes, we would definitely allow developers to count this type of space, a park or open space, inside their development. So finally, other jurisdictions, what have they done? Adams County has a 50 by 100 feet. Arapahoe County has a 250-foot setback on plugged wells. If it was plugged before 2014, which is when COGCC updated some of the rules and regulations, 150 feet if it was after. Broomfield has a 50 by 100. Town of Erie has 150, and Weld County has a 25-foot reverse setback. Aurora currently has none on this. We are proposing a 200 by 200. Again, that's a total square around the well in the middle, so it's 100 feet essentially on each side of the well bore. In summary, all wells are expected to be replugged in the future. We need this physical space prepared and set aside so that when the replugging has to occur, that it can be done in a safe and effective manner. We are proposing a permanent well workover easement of 200 by 200 with the parameters that I discussed before. And the question for council is, do you support this concept, and may we craft an ordinance to bring to a future study session to discuss?
Questions of staff?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Jeffrey, for that very in-depth presentation. I certainly support an ordinance for the permanent easements around plugged wells. I think that makes a tremendous amount of sense, just based off of what the information you've given us. And is this question that you're asking us for both the 2,000-foot setback and the permanent easement for the well, or just for the easement?
I'm not asking a question. I'm sorry, Councilmember McConnell, thank you for your comment. I'm not asking a question or proposing a 2,000-foot setback. The only proposal that I'm making this evening is for the permanent easement around plugged wells only. The additional information is only for your consideration. If council members wish to make a proposal, I'm happy to answer questions on that, and you can have your discussion.
Any further questions on the plug well then?
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say that I'm fine also with the easement of the 200 by 200. And I like the fact that the developers can also have it count towards open space.
Further questions? Is there opposition to the 200, is it 200 feet by 200 feet easement on plugged wells? Seeing none, then that's the direction of staff.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. 2022 fireworks outcomes.
Mayor?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, sir. I thought we were going to discuss the second portion then.
The setbacks?
Yes.
The reverse setbacks? I think any, if you have any questions to staff on, but I think any member can bring forward a proposal on that.
All right. So Jeffrey, I'd like to work with you on a proposal then.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, any member can do that.
Yep.
Okay. 2022 fireworks outcomes. Kane Hills, Deputy Chief.
Good evening. So the presentation that is before you all. Hang on a second here. The presentation that you see on the screen now was presented in Public Safety and Courts in June. I did add some outcome slides at the beginning to front load this. In addition, the same process occurs every year and it begins in February. And that's with internal stakeholder meetings and collaboration to ensure a safe and effective enforcement approach. So I've had a lot of questions, obviously, from council members through council requests, in addition to emails, and hopefully this can provide some insight as to what we do, why we do it, and the outcomes that have resulted from our approach. So again, like I said, planning meetings began in February. It's once a month leading up to the actual 4th of July. We also meet with fireworks vendors, and we also are responsible for the City of Aurora event. So the big show that goes down at the shops, as well as the Great Lawn. We have to inspect all of those as well to make sure they're in compliance, excuse me, with the requirements. And a big question I've had is, what do we do from a community engagement perspective related to communicating what is legal, what is illegal, and what determines that? So the next slide are the actual outcomes. So I'm not going to go through the last 3 years prior. I'll just kind of bring up these next two slides. You can compare and contrast. So fire ban metrics are utilized annually, all year long, every week. We pull those metrics, and based on those metrics, a final decision is made by June 15th to allow permissible fireworks. The messaging then related to the fireworks is always commenced on the first part of June, talking about safety and so on and so forth. But June 15th is when we have our determination of whether or not fireworks, permissible fireworks, will be allowed in the city of Aurora to be sold and used by the citizens based on those metrics. And that's cites fuel moisture content, 10, 100, 1000, energy release components, the drought monitor. Those three measures result in metrics that say, yes, it's too dry, or no, it's okay. So just really a quick definition, permissible fireworks do not include firecrackers, aerial shells, mortars, pop bottle rockets, skyrockets, Roman candles, etc. Every fireworks stand in the city of Aurora, and this year there were 15 of them, go through a temporary use permitting process and a robust inspection by our fire inspectors. So once we receive the use permitting, it goes through various stakeholders in the city, tax and licensing, as well as us. We go out to the actual site. We inspect the membrane structure, ensure that the storage and quantities of the actual fireworks doesn't exceed the appropriate threshold. And probably one of the most important things, which I did receive a lot of questions related to this topic as well, is to ensure that there aren't any illegal fireworks being sold. In addition, that tent, the storage, the handling, the sales, all of those components have to comply with the International Fire Code. I can assure you there were no illegal fireworks being sold in a tent that went through the temporary use permitting process within the city of Aurora. What are the outcomes related to that time frame? And typically we pull the metrics from July 1st through July 5th. That's our enforcement time. We received 485 complaints at the dispatch non-emergency line that resulted in 241 responses. And again, we partner with APD and we plan this for 6 months in advance, but unfortunately, due to circumstances in the community, sometimes our APD partners have to be reassigned during the fireworks enforcement process. And then we continue to do our patrols and at least try to confiscate, educate, and get to as many of the calls for service as possible. So that was the phone calls, the phone center, dispatch center. The online complaints, we received 82 actionable complaints, meaning the form was filled out correctly. There was someone that was willing to sign a complaint and or testify in court, compared to fireworks seen at Iliff and Chambers. There's nothing we can really do when someone calls and reports an area that's being utilized and it's not real time. We're not monitoring those phone lines. But what I can tell you, or I'm sorry, the online complaints, but what I can tell you is we start that, we go live with that process in June. And every one of those complaints that's received is followed up on. Even prior to July 4th, we knock on the door, we make contact with the citizen, we ask for them to describe what's going on. Are they willing to sign a complaint? Are they willing to testify, etc.? And typically what occurs is no one's willing to file a complaint and certainly not testify. So this year, there were 2 fires caused by illegal fireworks. And the one case I'll just talk about briefly was caught on a Ring door cam. And it actually showed this individual come out of the house, is a residential structure, and light a mortar. The mortar was faulty, and it basically was discharged about 3 feet above the cylinder and exploded on the driveway, basically throwing sparks all over the neighbor's Fitzer bush. Slowly thereafter, you see the Fitzer bush ignite, and the house ignited and obviously turned into a structure fire. Over $500,000 worth of damage. Wow. So one fire. And that person is being criminally charged. And this is really an important piece. And that's why I bring this certain case up, is because the individual immediately said, I bought this firework in a firework stand at XYZ. We actually took the remnants, the remaining components of that mortar shell, to the actual firework vendor and verified that that absolutely was not sold there. It was brought from somewhere else, out of state, I would assume, and used that way. So that was one fire. The other fire was a vegetation fire, small in size and confined quickly. So again, just to reiterate, the difficulty we have is we're out patrolling this, and there are 6 fire inspectors, myself, and a commander, and we try to team up with APD as previously communicated. And if there's something else that comes up in the city that's more important, which in emergency response for other things that APD responds to, we really are patrolling this entire city with 6 people on those nights, July 1st through the 5th. So 3 summons were issued, and the possibility of more. We still have 85 online complaints to go and contact and knock on doors. Last year, we knocked on over 400 and some doors, prior to 200 and some plus and 200 and some plus afterwards, following up with citizens that would complain. And the common theme that we were faced with was, as already previously stated, no one willing to sign a complaint or testify. So I want to look at this. In addition to 250 to 300 pounds were confiscated. So the approach here too is we get questions of why don't we write a summons to everybody? If we write a summons to, first of all, we have to see the person doing it, and it has to be an illegal firework right in front of us for us to actually cite them, unless there's someone willing to sign the complaint and testify. So we typically drive down a block. We see an area where we can see mortars going off in the air. As soon as we turn around the corner, all firework use ceases to exist. And we make contact with them. Now, if we see the fireworks on the sidewalk or piled up in the driveway, typically what occurs is we explain to them, this is illegal. I'm not sure if you know, but we're going to have to confiscate that, or you give them the penalty of a potential criminal summons. So this data comparable to the 2020, we had 1548 online complaints, 1569 phone line complaints, 2 summons issued. That was the most complaints online and phone line in the history that I've done this, and I've done this 7 years. And I can tell you there were some implications with that as well. There was a statewide fire ban. That was the COVID, where there was no July 4th spectacular here at the city, and we had a fire ban in place. So it didn't allow any use of any fireworks. 2021, we had 369 online, 944 phone line, and 6 summons issued. So the overall complaints, believe it or not, have gone down from 2020 to 2021 to 2022. The trend is that there are less complaints. However, I understand that it's still a nuisance, and there are still situations when very inappropriate, it's illegal. We have tried every facet of approach to curb the complaints and illegal usage. And going back to originally when this ordinance was introduced, the problem we are faced with here in the city of Aurora is that the surrounding unincorporated areas fall under the state statute, Colorado revised statute for what's legal in the state of Colorado. And what's legal in the state of Colorado exactly mirrors our ordinance of what we built into that ordinance that's also legal depending on the fire ban and the metrics. So they're aligned. The problem is if we impose a fire ban and an unincorporated county does not, they still put their tents up and they still sell the fireworks that we would sell if there was no fire ban. So basically 1 block out of the city limits, you have all these firework tents that people can go and purchase the fireworks and then come back into the city. So then we have people that are using the permissible fireworks in the event there wasn't a fire ban, and we have the continued nuisance from the mortars and the illegal fireworks, if that makes sense. That was kind of the thought process when that ordinance was brought forward, was that we're not going to control people bringing permissible fireworks sold by a county, unincorporated county, into the city and being utilized. And maybe we should give an option to purchase and use those fireworks dependent on the weather metrics, but have more control over what is sold. Our team can't go into an incorporated Arapahoe County, inspect their tents and see what they're selling, so on and so forth. So it was more of an approach to have a little more control over what's sold and to say it's not sold. And there are times when we have initiated a ban and don't allow fireworks to be sold or used in the city of Aurora, but the unincorporated county does not follow suit. That's a complexity that we've been faced with from the get-go. So the rest has been presented in public safety and courts. I can certainly go through any pieces on here that any of the council members might be interested in or want more information. But in the essence of time, I would just open that up to all of you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. And I know it's a really difficult situation because really what I think what most people that are calling are complaining about the illegal fireworks and there's, you know, kind of a confusion as to what is permissible and what's not. And they just assume it's that we're allowing illegal and fireworks that we don't. I've had constituents reach out to me and I do try to explain to them that people are going across the border to Cheyenne, Wyoming, buying the illegal fireworks. I know that also trying to get a witness is difficult in terms of some people don't want to testify because one lady told me that it takes time out of her day to go to court. And I was wondering, is that the only way they can testify, is they have to go to court, or can they do something in writing or by video? Do you know that? Or maybe that might be for the courts to answer, but.
Angela can probably answer that question. I believe they have to testify and show up.
And then I guess my only other comment is, it was very interesting. I know 2020, even in my neighborhood, was insane. And I think it's interesting that was during the time of COVID where we didn't have the fireworks show and fireworks were not being sold with the fire ban. So I think people just, you know, they were like, well, there's no shows. I'm going to just go get my own and do my own fireworks show. But it was your statistics really bear out what happened in 2020. For an educational campaign, personally, I know you guys try your best to do that. I would like us to do a more concerted effort leading up to 4th of July. But thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome. And I brought up the slide for marketing education. And this information is also broadcast on all the major news channels. They have a running list of what's illegal, what's legal, what municipalities allow firework usage. And this slide kind of details what we work on. And this starts June 1st. And then once we determine the metrics, we really go hard at communicating to everybody. And, you know, notifications in the water bill, social media, Nextdoor, Facebook, Twitter, our departmental webpage, Aurora TV. It's really, believe it or not, it's actually out there a lot, but I guess if people don't have access to this or take the time to really read and understand the ordinance, it could be certainly difficult because I personally, as my colleagues, when we drive around, we do a lot of explaining. Of course, I ask myself, are they pretending like they don't know because they don't want a summons, or are they really confused? And you, believe it or not, can really tell where they're at with the illegal firework usage.
Okay. Further questions to staff?
Mayor, Councilmember Lawson, I'm sorry, Councilmember McConnell.
Go ahead, Councilmember Lawson.
Okay, Councilmember Lawson, then Councilmember McConnell.
I wanted to know if it's possible maybe for part of the campaign to maybe do some realities of what fireworks does. Like if someone, you know, does set something like that off, what happens? I mean, you know, I know you're doing these campaigns, but like reality ones that shows something like a house being burned or someone getting burned from a firework, or what the impacts of those are. Because sometimes I think when people see the reality of things, sometimes I think they're kind of cognizant about doing things if they see what this could cause. So I just wanted to know, like, you know, maybe some makeshift type of things you could do, maybe at the capstick or something like that. But I just wanted to know if that's something to be thought of outside the box of what you guys are already doing.
Yeah, absolutely. We're always open to any suggestions of how to enhance this and make it more agreeable to everybody. And we all know that this is kind of a no-win situation around the board. But anything we can do and hear from all of you that your suggestions, we're more than willing to research it and implement it.
Councilmember Khan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Hills, for the presentation. So I guess this is an issue that, I think is, as you mentioned, it feels like a no-win. I think it's exceptionally frustrating for all of us. And the issues that I have with this are more than the property damage. Obviously, some of the video that we saw where, we all were out there fighting a fire with South Metro, and then people were still shooting off fireworks in the brush beyond the flames. Like, that's just completely beyond aggravating and just disrespectful and exceptionally troubling to see. But a lot of my constituents that I heard from this year, they're having personal, issues with this. Their PTSD is being triggered. Their pets are, in complete fear, or just, crying out to the point where they basically felt the need to give them like edibles and things like that to calm them down. Which I don't recommend, but that's what they did. And I'm just wondering, is there a way that we can create an area where folks can go do this, where the vendors can sell their product that is not necessarily inside of our residential areas? Like, is there a way that we can maybe work with Arapahoe County to utilize the fairgrounds, since there's a lot of, I think, dirt and concrete out there that's not flammable? Maybe we could find a way to provide, first responder services out there just to ensure things don't get out of hand. And as I mentioned, have the vendors go out there and, sell their wares. I'm just wondering, is there a safer way to do this where we're not, putting lives and property at risk and also potentially triggering post-traumatic stress disorder and, frankly, tormenting our pets for several days at a time or weeks at a time?
Yeah, just so for clarification, are you suggesting the permissible fireworks that are sold be able to be utilized in a setting like the fairgrounds, or are you suggesting the illegal fireworks that explode?
So I'm trying to see if there's a way that you think we can encourage folks to go utilize fireworks, period. Because as you mentioned, they're using the illegal ones here too, and the enforcement is still very difficult. Just out somewhere else where they're not going to damage property or harm people or again animals.
So just for a quick overview, the fires that have been caused historically, at least in the last 7 years that I've been part of this, and the ones that create noise and trigger people's PTSD are the illegal types. So since I've been up here, there hasn't been one fire caused by a permissible firework, because typically those are utilized by family members in the street. They don't shoot off across someone else's house or into the backyard or into a urban interface area that's, weeds and so on and so forth. So if it's illegal fireworks that you're suggesting in a setting like that, I believe the Colorado revised statute identifies what type of fireworks are permissible in the state of Colorado. So if we facilitated an area that was allowed for people to shoot off illegal fireworks, we would be promoting a crime. And I think
we don't want to do that.
Legal to chime in, but I think that would create an incredible amount of liability for the city and specifically for the people actually engaging in that activity. And really, the problem is the illegal fireworks that explode and leave the ground. And if we could figure out a way to even have a blitz or something that's a little more robust with having a strong stance on issuing summons or having more personnel do that, I don't think there's any other way around curbing the use of illegal fireworks. That's my personal opinion.
Any further questions?
Mayor.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Medina.
Yes, sir. Have you ever thought about, have you logged into like other hotspots, like certain areas that kind of are inherently? And then the other thing is, could it be possible to do drones?
Yeah, council member, I responded to your council request. I don't know if you read it yet, but the drone footage, again, we don't have a hard time identifying where the hotspots are. We have a tough time catching them in the act, if you will. I can tell you just from my past experience where the hotspots are, and it's pretty consistent each year. We've looked at other municipalities of how they actually issue summons, and some allow neighbors to take pictures and submit the picture, but not show up in court. We've discussed a lot of different situations that would yield potentially different outcomes, but we continue to research that. The drones would be effective potentially if we were trying to capture someone actually in the act of illegal usage, but we don't have that capability as of now. And what was your other question? I'm sorry. Drones.
Pretty much. Well, the other thing is then, since you kind of have a general idea of those hotspots, maybe we do a campaign to see if we get the word out in those specific neighborhoods to say, hey, FYI, we're kind of looking at this area, just to kind of maybe give, a bug in the ear to people to say, hey, we're kind of watching you, even though we may or may not be, just to kind of, warn people, so to speak.
Yeah, and to your point, when we do the proactive campaign prior to the actual July 4th, when we receive these complaints long before July 4th, it starts usually about June 1st. And those complaints start coming in through Access Aurora. And guess what? Those complaints that are front loaded in June are actually the hot spots that occur from July 1st to July 5th. So we actually are out there proactively knocking on the doors prior to the 4th of those areas, reminding them what the ordinance is, what's permissible, what the decision, or if the decision's been made yet, it'll be made on June 15th. And if we're called back there, you will be issued a summons, so on and so forth. So it's not from a lack of knocking on doors and communicating with the public, but we need some support from the community, and we probably need to build up a little more robust response from the 1st to the 5th, and have basically no other option but to issue summons for that time frame to really attempt to make an impact. All other measures have really been tried, and that would be my suggestion moving forward. And of course, always open to any suggestions from each of you of how to make this better and more agreeable for everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Further questions, comments? Seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Deputy Chief Hills. City retention and recruitment, Deputy City Manager Laura Perry.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. Laura Perry, Deputy City Manager. I am joined this evening by Ryan Lance, our Human Resources Director for the city. Let me just pull up the presentation here. Okay, so this item is a follow-up item from the June 4th spring workshop with City Council, where we presented some preliminary information on the market and economic conditions that we are seeing that are impacting the city. So tonight, we're going to walk you through those challenges once again and provide a little bit of an update there, provide an update on our workforce and retention challenges that the city is currently facing, and then present a proposed retention and recruitment plan that walks through and focuses on 3 major areas that we'll get into a little bit more detail on. So overall, our employee market and challenges, we are not the only ones that are being faced with some of the impacts from what we're seeing economically. So some events that have resulted in impacts on the city. So obviously the pandemic and the employment market and employment relationship, infusion of money into the U.S. market as a result of the pandemic. We continue to see supply chain issues between labor shortages, inventory, et cetera. We're seeing a greater resignation rate, as well as other global events that are continuing to impact energy, food, and financial systems, which are impacting city costs. The outcome of these events. So we're seeing, of course, rising costs of goods, services, housing, and energy in our community that our residents are experiencing and our employees. CPI inflation continues to increase. The federal government just put out some new information earlier this week. And in June, for a 12-month, we've seen a 12-month increase of a total of 9.1%. So that is continuing to trend upwards. We have a low employment rate, which is impacting our ability to fill positions. It's been about 3.6% over the last 3 months. And then again, I mentioned high inflation with low employment results in wage inflation. And HR has done a lot of market research around this nationally. And what we are seeing is a 5.1% national increase to wages. And we'll come back to that further in the presentation. And of course, all of these items together come together to impact our competition for labor, rising wages. So not only obviously we're competing, but also competing with other peer local governments to attract employees, high turnover and high vacancies in the city. So our internal workforce challenges in the city, so for city turnover, since 2020, our annual turnover rate has increased 47%. And you'll see that in the chart shown on the right-hand side. Our numbers for turnover continue to increase our percentage, and currently we are projecting that for the remainder of 2022, we are going to see a 9.3% increase. So in total, year-end 2022, we're projecting 18.5%. For city vacancies for career service, we're currently sitting at 17.5% vacancies. Civil service as of June is at 5%. So across the board, as a result of turnover, we're faced with a lot of vacancies in the city. A question was raised at the spring workshop. So why are employees leaving? And through the review of exit surveys and other data inputs, there are really 3 reasons that we're seeing employees are departing the city. The first is high workload and overtime. A lot of our employees are going above and beyond to address vacancies, fill in where they can, as they are so dedicated and committed to the city and in maintaining service levels for residents. Career advancement, so opportunities to move up in the organization. Many feel that there are greater opportunities elsewhere and are leaving for greater career advancement personally. And of course, we've seen a lot of retirements. We're very lucky in the city of Aurora that we have a lot of employees who have been dedicated to the city for so many years. And these folks have decided to move on to their next phase. And so we are seeing a lot of retirements in the city. So again, the key theme here, compounding effect of vacancies, turnovers, the economic market. We're seeing a lot of impacts now on city operations. And just to touch on a few, code enforcement currently has a quarter of their positions vacant. Certainly that's impacting response times and the amount of time that our code enforcement officers are able to be on the scene. Our animal shelter is closed on Tuesdays, so not fully operational due to vacancies, and obviously that impacts adoptions, veterinary care, and animal reunifications. Pros, recreation, our pools are not able to be open to full hours. We're continuing to be challenged by recreation staff, which support class offerings at our recreation centers. And then on the operations and maintenance side, we currently have a 25% vacancy rate, which is beginning to impact the frequency of mowing, weeding, trash collection, and other key critical services for our parks. HR has had several vacancies, and that has impacted their ability to support the hiring of positions and also support the daily workforce and the needs of our workforce. And then we have several departments that have employees on mandatory overtime to maintain service levels and support the public. This slide is the same slide we showed you back in early June. This shows the full-time employee turnover by department. The orange peach color is the 2022 projection by department. So you can see several departments, housing, community services, 50%, HR, 45%, city attorney, 40%. It is fairly great. And then for 2021, that is the gray bar. That's year to date. So you can see currently where we sit and, of course, again, where we're projecting. Recognizing that employee engagement and our culture in the city is a big part of our work. We engaged in a culture and employee engagement survey earlier this year to really gather more information from employees to help inform strategies moving forward for retention. So some preliminary high level outcomes of the survey, employees reported high levels of being passionate of their work. We are so blessed to have so many employees who are passionate and enjoy what they do and love working for the city of Aurora. That came out very high. Many are motivated with public service work. They find their work personally meaningful, and our direct supervisors in the organization are high performers and supportive of our employees. On the other side of the coin, employees did report lower satisfaction in tools and technology to help support them do their job well, feeling valued for their contributions, the city being inclusive, equitable, and fair. And then work-life balance was also feedback we received back that our employees are struggling with that, possibly due to the number of vacancies and turnover with folks taking on more work and again, trying to maintain our city service levels. So all of those various inputs, the market, our survey, our research, we are coming forward to you today to walk you through a proposed retention and recruitment multi-pronged plan. As you can see, there's various factors that are occurring here. There's not one solution, which is why we are really honing in on 3 areas: business processes in the city, culture and engagement, and then monetary items. The goal with this plan is a multi-pronged, equitable approach that balances short-term and ongoing strategies to retain and attract talent, which we will continue to evaluate as we go forward, and we'll get into that in a couple of slides. Implement strategies in overcoming the current employment market to maintain our service levels. We want to make Aurora an employer of choice. We want folks to come work for us and stay and work for us for many years and retire with us. And then lastly, we really want to enhance employee engagement in city culture, which is a big focus of our plan. So business processes themselves, you'll hear from Ryan in a little bit about Workday and our implementation of Workday, but Workday will provide a lot of efficiencies across the city. It will enhance our workforce management, our processing time, our turnaround time, and will really be a game changer for the city, and we're really thrilled that we're implementing that. Department operational evaluations, we're continuing to look at efficiencies in departments, evaluate department operations, and identify opportunities for improvement and engage in implementing those improvements. And then last, going back to hiring, we are currently working on enhanced and quicker processes for hirings, for job postings, for onboarding of employees, and then of course compensation and classification requests to keep up with the market. That's really key in this dynamic market right now, and so we are actively daily working on this to make sure that we're not missing a beat and attracting and getting folks into positions as they're hired on. Back to culture engagement. This is core to this plan. So we are going to be taking a concerted effort to enhance connection across the city with employers and employees, and making sure that folks feel like they are connected to their work, that they're meeting council goals, and that they are really feeling their impact on the community. That's really important. We are working on a comprehensive performance management program. Ryan came forward to the Management and Finance Policy Committee meeting a couple of months ago with his team and presented on some of the tenets of that program that we're working at, and we're anticipating that to roll out along with Workday. Enhancing employee communication training and development, so providing our employees with the tools and trainings to help them be successful in their positions. Working throughout the organization on career advancement and steps, and making sure We are providing a tract for employees to stay with us for a long time. And then, of course, lastly, providing an intentional focus on employee appreciation and developing a sense of pride. So bringing back a lot of our employee recognition events, having regular town halls and face-to-face meetings, and building that sense of community and engagement in the city. And then, of course, leveraging low and non-monetary engagement survey items. So we're continuing to evaluate the culture and engagement survey results. And there's a lot of non-monetary responses and strategies that we are looking at doing. The ones I walked you through are just a few of them. And last, monetary items. So we have classified these as to ongoing and one time. So recognizing the nature of our current economic position and of course the need to support employees faced with current inflation struggles, as well as overtime and overburden of work, we are proposing several things as part of our monetary portion of the plan. So targeted comp market adjustments. This is something that we include in the annual budget, and this will continue to look at classifications. HR engages in this activity every year to ensure that certain classifications and positions are keeping up with market. For one-time strategies, these include a 5% early 2023 pay raise in 2022. This is primarily due to the Workday implementation and the need to start that early, but also to help support our employees with inflationary factors that they're faced with in their daily lives. For the other two items, so a signing bonus and a referral bonus, many local governments have started to do this to attract key positions to fill in their cities. So we are looking at a targeted signing bonus between $1,000 and $5,000. This would be paid in increments and would be through June and December of this year. Referral bonus as well, $1,000 per referral. This would also be split, $500 at the time of new hire, and then $500 after 6 months of being hired to ensure retention through the hiring. And then lastly, our 2022 performance recognition program. This program will really be focused on providing bonuses to our outstanding employees in the city, as well as our frontline workers. Our frontline workers really have been the heart of the city through the pandemic, have provided services directly to the community, and continue to support service levels. And so this is an added recognition program to ensure that they are monetarily compensated to also help with some of the inflationary factors that we're seeing. Just a couple things of note. APD has already implemented 2022 signing bonuses, referral bonuses, and are offering relocation costs as well. And Aurora Fire Rescue will be replicating a similar program to the police department. Aurora 911 is offering signing bonuses and referral bonuses. And in regards to the market adjustments, we have completed several this year. We're continuing to take a look at various classifications. The ones that have been completed this year include Aurora 911, APD Records, Animal Services, Aurora Water, and Court Administration. And next, Ryan will walk you through Workday and the revised calendar that we're proposing for various city processes.
Thanks, Laura. So the timing of the Workday Enterprise Resource Planning System, it does have a large impact on all these monetary items. So the Workday system has a projected go-live date of December 16th. So as a result of this go-live date, the HR and payroll systems have to actually have a freeze, meaning we have to hold our current system and convert it over to Workday. And that freeze date is October 26th. So what this means is that all major data entry points, especially the base pay changes, they need to be completed prior to October 26th. So this has an impact on the timing of all of our processes that would typically be completed in the fourth quarter of 2022. So in order for us to complete the implementation as scheduled, we need to adjust many of our end of the year processes. So the first one being our 2023 benefit renewals. This is where we set the city's benefit package. We actually have to have that completed at the end of this month. We also have to move up the city's annual performance core 4 evaluations. And we have to have that completed by September 3rd if we want to meet some of these other deadlines. But in order to process and complete this proposed early annual pay increase on September 30th paycheck date, then moving up to the evaluations is going to be really pivotal. If we don't move up those annual pay increases by September 30th, then alternatively, we're going to have to wait until after Workday go live, which does have a lot of risks of meeting that payroll 1 of 2023. And that's a vulnerability that we're trying to avoid. The remaining items on the list, the high performance bonuses, recognition bonuses, CDL bonuses, certification bonuses, all of these are one-time funding. They're easier to process than the base pay changes, but those still need to be completed prior to the October 26th freeze date. And then lastly, the 2022 annual citywide market analysis. That was the ongoing funds on the previous slide. It's for us to keep up with the market and be competitive. It also includes equal pay for equal work obligations. So we do have an audit that we have to do, and we have to make pay adjustments based upon that. And then all associated pay is what we're proposing to do right after the go live date, because again, those are going to be base pay changes, and we have that 3-month period where we can't do anything. And then the Workday implementation, it does provide administrative and logistical justification for us really trying to process a lot of this stuff as early as possible.
Okay, so that sums up our presentation today. And so the question for you all as we conclude and turn to questions is, does council support us moving forward with the proposed retention and recruitment strategies, those being the multi-pronged approach for business processes, culture engagement, and of course the monetary items that we walked you through earlier?
Questions to staff?
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. My question on the go live date of December 16th, it says projected. So what happens? I mean, I know you need to move up everything in order to meet that deadline, but what if that doesn't happen until January?
And that's why it's projected, is because there's a lot of things with how big of a project this is that we need to be aware of. We feel very confident we're going to hit that December 16th date, but we just want to be prepared to make some adjustments. So if we do make that change, we won't know probably for another month or two how things are going in the next phase of testing.
But you should know, let's see, what are we, July? So I mean, in the next couple months, you should probably know if you're going to do that.
We would have to make adjustments at that time.
Okay, good. And then my other comment was just on, I'm glad to see the performance bonuses in there. I do know that, you know, there's employees that really have gone above and beyond and deserve to have a performance-based bonus. And I'm all in favor of that. I think that's actually, you know, I come from the free market, corporate America, and we didn't give raises unless, you know, you deserved one. So it was a little bit different than city government. But I'm glad to see that being incorporated in there. Then lastly, just on how we advertise positions, because I'm glad to see also that we're enhancing the process and we're going to have a quicker process, because I have heard from some people internally and externally that it seems to take a long time for when a position is open, when it's posted. And so I hope we're utilizing all of our resources in terms of where we post to get the biggest value.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry about that, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm in a hospital tonight. Apologies. Can you repeat the question for me one more time?
Oh, no, I was just, I just was on how we advertise our positions, and I was glad to see that we're improving that process to make it quicker, but yes. Just curious, and, you know, maybe offline I could get that answer, but just where we do post positions.
Brian, can you speak to that?
Yes, and that is something, in terms of where we post positions, we have our standard 3 or 4 places that we post positions, and then we work with the supervisors to recommend, or they tell us what, agencies, what places they want posted. But that's one thing that we're really focusing on. We're also doing reposting, re-advertising, and then part of it is you'll hear from all departments. It's tough out there. It's tough to get applicants, to get qualified candidates, and then even when you get those qualified candidates, we can set up interviews for four interviews for the next week, and we'll have 2 or 3 of them canceled before we have interviews. So
right, and again,
speed is important.
Speed is important because the quicker you can, if from once where they apply, the quicker you can get them in for an interview, you close that gap of losing them. So thank you very much.
Further questions to staff? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving this proposal forward? Then number 4C will move forward. Number 5A, rules of order and procedure amendment. I believe that Councilmember Gardner has requested that one be delayed until August 1st. 5B, establishing a restaurant program criteria. Andrea Hamnick.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Tonight before you is a resolution stating the criteria for our restaurant program at the December 13th, 21 study session. Council authorized funding under ARPA for a variety of programs, and on April 18th, we made a presentation, and the restaurant program was approved by council to assist food and beverage operations, providing that the program criteria would come back and be reviewed at this meeting. So the resolution is included in your packet, and basically there are just a few that I believe council directed us to have participating in the program equally: the business operation, the owner of the property, and the city, although the city's participation will be capped at $300,000, that eligible properties would have been previously vacant and also have some previous existing infrastructure that would allow for food and beverage operations, and that that the program funds should be spread across the city. Those criteria will, if this resolution is approved by council, then we'll go forward and negotiate deals and present them in front of council so that you can see the deals that add a consent agenda at both study session and consent for approval.
Questions to staff? Seeing no questions, is there objection to moving item number 5B forward? Seeing none, item number 5B will move forward. Thanks, Andrea.
Thank you very much.
Item number 5C, amended intergovernmental agreement for voter service and polling centers and ballot drop box locations. Councilmember Angela Lawson.
Mayor, thank you. I just want to say that this issue was brought towards to the Pfizer committee to present today, but for the upcoming election, I will let City Clerk Rodriguez present the item, and then if there's any questions, we can ask her. But it was presented at the Pfizer committee.
Thank you, Councilmember Lawson. So this IGA, or this resolution, is to approve amending the existing IGA with Arapahoe County that was approved by council in May of 2020. The IGA was for the operation and use of city facilities for VSPC and drop box locations for the 2020, 2021, and 2022 elections. Currently, the IGA has 5 city facilities. The proposed amendment would include 3 additional city facilities. Arapahoe County is requesting these due to growth in voter counts and gaps in geographical coverage. So listed on the screen are the 3 requested locations. These facilities have been visited by Arapahoe County, and the ADA inspections have been completed. And also the 5 current locations. So this resolution would only be to add the 3 additional locations. And that is all I have.
Questions of staff?
Mayor,
I'm sorry, Councilmember Zelinski.
is the county going to pay for these ballot boxes?
They actually do not pay for the city facilities. That's what was approved in the 2020 IGA. So in 2020, 2021, and 2022, in the IGA, it stated that they were not going to pay for the city facilities. For the 2022 election, we're going to be redoing the IGA. So that's something that the city can consider moving forward.
Further questions of staff?
Mayor Sundberg,
Councilmember Sundberg.
are these ballot boxes within the eye of a closed caption camera system to, minimize vandalism or ensure that correct voting is taking place?
So these aren't necessarily where the ballot boxes are going to be. These are the voting center locations. So where people can go in person and vote. So that's where these locations are. But yes, the ballot box, they have 24-hour surveillance. It's recorded.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving 5C forward? Seeing no objection, 5C will move forward. Thanks, Katie. Item number 7A, Southeast Recreation Center and Fieldhouse Dedication Plaque. Joe Sack.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. I'm Joe Sack, Recreation Services Manager. I'm here tonight with a resolution seeking approval for the Southeast Recreation Center and Fieldhouse Dedication Plaque. And if I'm here with that, you know that we're getting really close to opening up the new Recreation Center. And I know that there's going to be a council tour scheduled for next month through Public Works. So I hope you're all getting excited about the opening of the new rec center. But for tonight, the purpose of the plaque is to give recognition to the past and present public servants responsible for the creation of the Southeast Recreation Center and Fieldhouse, so present and future generations can recognize their service to the city in making this project possible. The names listed on the plaque have been verified according to policy by the Director of Communications and Marketing and the City Clerk. The staff requests approval to move this item forward to the next City Council meeting for final approval by resolution. And I can share the plaque. It was in your packet. This is what the packet, you see my screen? This is the how the plaque will be laid out. Of course, this is made in brass.
We don't see your screen yet, Joe.
See that yet.
Oh, there it is.
Okay, thank you. So this is the standard type of plaque that we see at all of our dedication sites of city facilities. It's a standard brass plaque. It's in the entry of our first set of double doors inside the main hall. As you see it listed here, the names are listed according to policy. Mayors are listed chronologically according to the project calendar, and that is from the time that the project was approved and then also all the way through completion. So that's why we have multiple people listed under positions. City council members are then listed alphabetically using the same criteria, date criteria. City managers are listed chronologically, and then staff are then listed alphabetically as well. And then we follow up with project managers, our contractor, and then also the architect rounds out the plaque. I'm able to answer any questions.
Any questions with staff?
Yes, I have one.
Councilmember Bergen.
Thank you. And thank you. I'm excited for the tour and for obviously the opening. So if a council member did not vote in favor of the recreation center that I sponsored, they still get to be on the plaque?
Yes, they do.
Okay, I have an amendment, and that to change the name of this to the Francois Bergen Memorial Southeast Recreation Center. Is there any objection?
I like
Memorial.
that.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, wait a minute, not memorial.
Yeah.
Is that a threat?
Okay.
I'm not ready to go.
Is there any further comments on I'm sorry, 7A? Any objection to moving 7A forward? Seeing none, 7A will move forward. Although I like the name of what I had there. Very well. With no further business before City Council, the study session is adjourned. Thanks,
All
everybody.
right. Night, y'all.